Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this month's Scrutiny Panel meeting. The fire alarm procedures are, if the fire alarm is activated, please vacate the offices down the main staircase, opposite the lifts in the foyer, assemble in Hawley Square on the green, and officers will assist you and advise you when it's deemed safe to return to the chamber. Would everyone present please ensure their mobile phones are turned to silent and they are not used to make or receive phone calls while this meeting is in progress. Please note this meeting is being live streamed for members of the public. The meeting will also be recorded and subsequently broadcast on the internet. Does anyone intend to film the meeting? Okay, we'll move on. There's no members of the public, so we'll move on from that. I've had one request to speak under 20.1 to Councillor Everett on item number 8. No public speaking, so move on to apologies for absence. I've got Councillor Moore being replaced by Councillor Manners, and I've also got Councillor Cupp, who sent his apologies, and him and his partner had a baby last week, so a little baby Florence, so we all send congratulations. I'm sure he's watching, so Okay, moving on to declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest? No? Okay, moving on to item number 3, the minutes of the previous meeting. To approve the minutes of the Overview and Scrutiny Panel meeting on the 15th of February 2024, a copy is attached to the agenda pack. And can I have a proposer, please? Councillor Green and Councillor Christian Bright to second. All councillors agree? Okay, thanks. I'll sign those off. Okay, moving on to item number 4. Cabinet member presentation from Councillor Duckworth on commercial property. I will call on Councillor Duckworth to give her presentation.
Hold on a minute. Hello, so this is a commercial property rental process presentation. I spent an hour with Andrea, Ms. Plant, last Thursday, who explained as much as she could to me in an hour about this, but I'll go through it, and then if you've got any questions at the end, then we'll be happy to answer them. So, vacant properties in our portfolio arise from various sources, which could be tenant surrender, properties vacated due to business closures or lease terminations, identification of new potential, properties that are identified for new purposes or developments, properties that are no longer needed, operational properties that are surplus to requirements, heightened interest, properties attracting increased attention due to market demand or strategic significance. So the marketing strategy is tailored to each property's scale and complexity. For smaller properties with manageable interests, we handle marketing in-house. Council-led efforts, including targeted email campaign, social media posts and local outreach, accompany viewings for potential tenants and direct negotiations. So obviously that takes up officer time. Larger complex properties require external agents. Agents assist with property portal uploads, Zoopla, Rightmove, etc., and conduct viewings. Targeted marketing campaigns to reach a broader audience beyond the boundaries of the district. So, setting rent levels. Rent levels for our properties are set through careful consideration of various valuation methods. And these are fairly standard, not something that we've just made up ourselves. The 3 main approaches are cost approach, evaluating the cost to replace the property minus the depreciation. Income approach, analysing the property's potential income stream often used for income generating properties. Market approach compares the property to similar ones in the market. All 3 methods are valuable. Our portfolio predominantly relies on the market approach, the comparable method. This involves using rental data from similar properties in the area to establish competitive and fair rent levels for our offerings. This approach ensures that our properties are priced fairly and consistently throughout. The comparable method under the market approach considers many factors that influence rental values: location, proximity to amenities, transport links and neighbourhood dynamics, size and spec, evaluating square footage, layout and property and structure. Amenities, consideration of unique property features, enhancing desirability. Recent transactions, real-time market insights from comparable property transactions. market conditions, adaptation to economic and real estate market fluctuations, tenant demographics, understanding the target tenant demographic and their preferences, property age and condition, assessing the age and overall condition of the property, zoning, which is only applicable to retail, and from what I recall, that's to do with the size of windows. And Miss Plant is nodding. Rent reviews may deviate from comparative valuation model due to lease conditions. Predetermined lease terms such as fixed increased rent review, I might be able to give a bit more detail on that. That provides a predetermined fixed percentage increase at specified intervals. Open market rent review adjusts rent based on current market conditions, ensuring it reflects the property's current value if it were to be on the open market. RPI, Retail Price Index, rent review, links rent adjustments to changes in the Retail Price Index reflecting inflation. Turnover rent review ties rent to the tenant's sales or turnover. Staggered rent review involves multiple rent adjustments at different intervals. Stepped rent, gradual predetermined increases at specified points during the lease term. Cap and collar rent reviews sets limits on a minimum and maximum percentage the rent can increase by. And that's a sort of another way of, it's another price index basically. Council's commercial property rental process is dynamic and adaptable as no one size fits all. We've got an example here of, I'm just about read, of a worked example of how we work out what a rent might be. So we use different properties that are already existing, that we're already renting. However, they're very unlikely to be exactly the same, so adjustments are made. So you can see that different weights are given to how close they are to the type of property we're going to be setting the rent for. And this one is a cafe building serving space and outside seating, 4 tennis courts, putting green and 5 parking spaces. But because one or two of the comparators don't have tennis courts, then those will be excluded. So that's why we've got those prices there and underneath. And then we look at parking spaces, total area, it's full repairing and insurance, lease. The lease term is included in those adjustments. And then there's inside the Lease and Tenants Act. So an interesting thing is that when somebody takes on a lease, they can agree to be either inside or outside the Act, which is completely different from private housing. So the rent review and adjustment figures are there. And at the bottom you can see how we weight the different elements, and you get a figure for with parking spaces and with tennis courts. Thank you for listening, and any questions?
Thank you, Councillor Duckworth. Members? Councillor Manners.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Duckworth. This presentation that you've got here, presumably we have these figures for every property within the TDC portfolio. Is that the case?
I would assume so. Is that correct?
They would be at different times, so they won't necessarily be the same. Rent reviews don't always follow the same trajectory. That's why those deviations were mentioned earlier. So if, for example, the lease requires that the rent review is calculated on a turnover basis, you wouldn't do a comparable evidence with adjustments like this. You would do as per the lease, you would apply the turnover percentage to the rent review. So the comparable evidence is needed for all of our assets.
I mean, I think that answers it. I was just trying to get to find out that we do have a handle on all of the TDC commercial leases and that we know where we stand. Would I be right in thinking that we... actually, I do have a number of questions, actually, if I could sort of go through a couple of things from that. Some of TDC's property portfolio is obviously not purely commercial. It's got community benefits. How do you go about working, what a fair rent would be versus the community benefit? Do you have a separate sort of portfolio of community benefit property and a ring-fenced kind of pure commercial portfolio, or is it just decided on an ad hoc case-by-case basis and they're all lumped in together?
So I think what we're doing, and I'll get Ms Plant to confirm this, is all properties are treated the same initially. However, what we're planning to do is having some sort of grant process, and I'll pass over to Ms Plant to go into a bit more detail about that.
Thank you. Yes, that's absolutely correct. So the valuation methodology there is no factor for community benefit. It's really difficult to quantify. So valuation methodology doesn't allow for that. So what we do is we set commercial rent levels for all of the properties. And if there is the community benefit that you're talking about, or the community organisation that wishes to take up a lease at a commercial level, if that is a community organisation that we wish to support, then we can do that in a transparent way via grant funding, rather than setting a zero rent but then not having anything to hand that we can then monitor and report back on.
Can you just talk us through, you mentioned there about how tenancy is coming to an end, why we would be reletting. Where the property is outside the Act, and could you just talk us through the process of at what stage you start renegotiating with the existing tenant for a renewal of an existing lease, just a timeline and how that process comes about, and what, who's involved and at what stage of the process?
That's all relatively already predetermined by the lease. So the lease will say termination is subject to a 3-month notice or a 6-month notice, at which point we need to trigger that negotiation with the tenant if that's a tenancy that needs to be renewed. In terms of the reference to the Landlord and Tenant Act 1954, that is the provision that gives rights to renew for an additional term to a tenant. However, not all leases are inside the Landlord and Tenant Act. The ones that are specifically contracted out don't have that provision to automatically renew. So if we want to renew that tenancy, then a negotiation between the landlord and tenant is needed to achieve that.
Can I just bring other people in and then we'll come back to you in a minute, Councillor Austin?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Duckworth. I followed all the presentation till we got to the worked example, and then I was utterly mystified. I'm wondering if Ms Plant could just go through that with us in a little bit more detail. Would that be okay?
So, as Councillor Duckworth explained, we use our subject property, and then we take 3 other properties, or 2 or 3 or 4, depending on what available data we have. We would take those properties, and you would never find 2 properties that are exactly the same. And even when you have a chain of industrial units that are all the same size and the same build, you'll still have different potential uses between the 2 of them. So there's always going to be variations within the rent level. So you would take the comparable evidence, and you will see here that we've noted the type of transaction that is noted on. So you've got open market letting or a rent review, and then the third one is an open market letting again. You will see that on the side here where we've got some comments, we've highlighted the fact that open market lettings carries a higher weighting as opposed to a rent review. What that means is that the rent review is a slightly more artificial figure than the open market market letting, because that's between a willing tenant and a willing landlord. A rent review is a negotiated figure, so it's slightly more artificial. So therefore we would add more weighting to the properties that have achieved the rent on the open market. Similarly, you will see that we note the date of the transaction, because we need to bring it to the date that we need the subject property to be valued at. So again, we would allow higher weighting to the properties that have been achieved closer to our date for our rent review here. That weighting will be applied at the end. The other thing that we've done here, you'll see that parking spaces, none of our comparable properties have got parking spaces. So what we've done, we've removed the 5 parking spaces and we valued those separately, and we will add them back at the end. Our subject property has 4 tennis courts, and unfortunately we can only have comparable evidence of one other property which has tennis courts. So again, we've removed anything that makes our comparable evidence too unique to be able to compare. We need to get to a stage where we are comparing apples with apples. So by removing the tennis courts value, we then sort of subtract the 3 tennis courts value from the headline rent here, which is 8,500. So we are only looking at the net rent without the anomalies. Following on from that, as I said, we remove the parking spaces, and then we look at the size of the units. So we have different sizes, and the end goal is to get to a rent per square metre. Then we look at the type of rent and type of lease. So the FRI stands for full repairing and insuring leases. Again, here you need to make some adjustments. If, say, your subject property would have been internal repairing and insuring only, that means that the tenant is enjoying more benefit and the landlord's got more liability. So then we would make small adjustments here. Lease terms, again, this is a very important factor. Shorter leases give more flexibility, therefore they're worth more to the tenant because that flexibility comes at a cost. So again, we will make some very small adjustments here in terms of percentages to make sure that we are comparing apples with apples. So we've got 25-year lease. When we are comparing it with a 5-year lease, we have to adjust that downwards by 8%. Again, we would look at the landlord and tenant provision, because the landlord and tenant provision provides additional benefits to the tenant. So therefore, if our comparable evidence is outside that act, we need to bring that rent in line. So we make some more adjustments. And then we look at the rent review, how close together the rent reviews periods are. The longer they are, the more the tenant is enjoying a lower rent, because it takes longer for them to bring back to market standard. So we make some very small adjustments there. And last but not least, we would tally up all those small adjustments that we've made across the process, and we would apply those adjustments to the rent per square metre, which we've established earlier. And then this is where it gets really interesting. This is where we apply the apportionment, so the weighting we spoke about earlier. It doesn't mean that we would just add these 3 values together here and just put an average. It means that we would take 45% of the first value, because it's the most comparable one. We will take 25% of the next value and 20% of the other one. So we apply the weighting across all 3 comparable evidence, which you will see it gives us a rent per square metre here of £137. Multiply that by the size of the unit, add back the parking spaces that we took out earlier and the tennis court, and you arrive at your final valuation figure.
Excellent, thank you.
Councillor Bright.
Thanks. If you'll indulge me a couple of questions, that'd be great. Thank you for your report. The first question is relatively straightforward, I think. Do we have a default setting when it comes to whether or not it's in or out of the 1954 Act?
So all leases are inside the Act unless they are specifically contracted out. So as standard, all leases come inside the Act, and you have to have a specific part of the lease at the end that signs, and the tenant is aware that lease is outside the Act, so they don't have that protection.
I appreciate that. Do we have a stance on it, though, that we prefer them not to be, or is it just case-by-case basis?
It is on a case-by-case basis, and it depends on the desirability of the property. If it's a property that's really easy to let and we never have vacancies, then there's no incentive. There's no need to have the property inside the Act. But if it's something really unique that we would want the tenant to have that extra protection, there is no reason why we wouldn't give that.
Thank you. My next question is really around the resource that you have at your disposal. I was speaking recently to an organisation in Broadstairs that they've come to the end of their 25-year lease. They've had a 800% increase proposed to them, which they're concerned about. They're a sports organisation, and they have no one to negotiate with. I think the person that was dealing with it has left the organisation. How up to speed are we in terms of the resource that we've got to cope with the volume of property we've got right now?
The property department has had, historically has had quite a lot of surveyors on contract basis. We've now been successful in securing full-time permanent surveyors. What I would advise in this instance, we have a general inbox which is monitored by 2 surveyors on a daily basis. What we do from that general inbox, we take across the week, we take all the new workload that's been added, and on a Monday afternoon we have a team meeting where we allocate all new pieces of work. So if it's a new piece of work that needs to be dealt with, I would advise that we just email the general inbox, and then by Monday afternoon that will be allocated to a surveyor who will make contact with them.
Okay, thanks. It's not new. It's been since the summer, so they're kind of in a tricky position in terms of their financial planning, but I'll bear that in mind. Thank you. And finally, you talked about the grant process. You know, this being a sporting organisation, if the rent has shot up, who do they come to for a grant potentially?
Again, if they put that into their proposal in the email, I can make sure that is discussed at. We've got various forums. We've got a property working group that we discuss matters such as these, and we have to establish exactly which companies we have. I think over 200 charities just in Margate, so we really need to choose which companies we support and why, and you know what we need to have tangible results from that support. So I think that's really important to set at first level.
Thanks.
Councillor Green.
Yeah, 2 questions. The first one has just occurred to me. Who is it that decides which organisations get grants and which don't? Is that an officer decision, or is there political involvement?
I think individual grant applications within, if there's a grant scheme that's been approved by the council and the cabinet, individual grant applications would be officer decisions. But of course that needs to be within an allocated budget and an approved process. So we do have some grant schemes that are approved, and you know, the individual applications are delegated to officers. You know, certain circumstances there might be call for other organisation-specific grants, and I can think of one particular instance which I think it's worth referencing, which is the citizens' advice, Thanet citizens' advice that benefit from a grant directly from the council, which is approved annually in the budget. They are also a tenant of the council, and they pay a rent for the unit that they rent from us. As Andrea said, you know, the most transparent way of dealing with issues like that is to charge an appropriate rent for the accommodation, and then if the council's minded to make a grant, to make that grant separately, because then everybody can see what we're doing.
Is there a list of grant schemes that is available?
Yes, there is. We'll share that.
Thank you. And the other question is, over the years, the council seems to have problems enforcing full repairing leases. And I wondered if you'd like to comment on that.
So full repairing leases are enforceable, but the main tool that we have at our disposal to enforce this full repairing lease is either termination because of breach of contract, which leaves us in pretty much the same position, and then we have dilapidations. Dilapidations can be carried out, but they can be capped based on the rental levels we were charging. So if you're looking at a property that historically hasn't been up to market standard in terms of rent level, so we've been supporting charitable organisations, it's really difficult to recuperate any of the costs through dilapidations because they can be capped based on the level of investment from the rent.
Do we inspect our properties on a regular basis?
We inspect properties on a cycle. Most of them are tenant responsibilities. So instead of an inspection, what we do is they get a declaration from the tenant, which is something we do on a yearly basis. We get a declaration from them to state that they understand all the compliance matters they need to adhere to and that they are up to date with their compliance documentation.
Mr Blundell wants to come in on that.
Thank you, Chair. I was just going to add to the sort of conversation around grant funding and support that's available for charities. A bit of a deviation from rent support, but there is additional discretionary support available in terms of business rate relief. So all charities should be in receipt of 80% relief as part of mandatory sort of legislation. But if a charity meets the sort of our criteria, which is pretty much broadly aligned with our corporate objectives. So if they're providing services that are in line with that, we typically will give full relief on that as well. So such a sport charity, if they're not already in receipt of the full discretion relief, I recommend that they apply for it.
Councillor Davis.
Thank you, Chair. A couple of questions. The first one is we were in a very real mess, I'm aware, a couple of years ago in terms of existing lessees and outdated and overrun leases that have gone periodic and that. How are we in terms of bringing things in line and ensuring that everybody renting is on a full, valid and up-to-date lease? And within those leases, this authority historically seems to have a problem with understanding break clauses and break points, because we have many examples where the lessee has been in potential breach or and possibly action should have been taken, and we hear time and again, I mean Brett's is a case in point, oh there's no break point, there's nothing we can do. Well, can we have your assurance that that has been dealt with in the leases that are being issued now, so that we don't have this problem with not being able to manage the asset properly?
Yes, absolutely. That's a fair point, which is why we would always advocate for shorter term leases, so we can then bring the new leases up to modern standards. Legislation changes constantly. If you think about a lease that was granted 30 years ago, we didn't have as much legislation around the compliance side of things and the tenant responsibility. So at every renewal stage, we take advantage of this and we modernise the lease. We are tied as to how much we can change. If it's inside the Act, our hands are tied. You cannot change the lease terms. They have to be on similar terms, except for small modernisations. So unfortunately, where you have a historical lease with very different terms that were the market standard 30 years ago, the lease is the governing body here. It's the most onerous type of contract that you can enter into, and you cannot change that after it's been issued, unfortunately. But modern leases we have drafted by our in-house solicitors, and they are up to date and on all the commercial standards.
Thanks.
Councillor Wing.
Thank you for your report. I know there's an element of commercial sensitivity here, but we don't need to see any commercial information. So is there any chance we could have a list of all our present properties and just a simple yes or no whether there's a leaseholder there? I mean, certainly I think we're probably one of the areas with the greatest number of properties. Certainly we've got the largest because we have the port and harbour. So it would be useful, I think, for all councillors to just know exactly what our properties are and where they are and whether they're actually being leased. And we don't need to see any of the financial consideration. So that would be really appreciated, because I know we have some very large properties, but we also have some very tiny ones as well that just exist. Is there some room for manoeuvre for tenants that take over dilapidated properties? I mean, I use the example of Spencer Square tennis courts and cafe because it's just round the corner from me, and sadly, it did take a considerable time for a new leaseholder to be found, but I think now we've got full staffing and better staffing, that process will speed up. The building was considerably dilapidated, and the new leaseholder has not only had a massive increase in the cost of the lease, I could mention it here, but I'm not going to, but also has had to spend a significant amount of money on making the building fit for purpose. So I think she was given, or they were given, a small period of no rent, but it really didn't go anywhere to cover the cost of getting that building back up to being fit. I've got a few questions, so I'll just ask them one at a time if that's okay.
So in reference to the first question, we already have a transparency report which is published on our website. You can find that underneath the heading of land, assets and land. The transparency report not only lists every single asset of the commercial property in the general fund, but it also groups them into tenanted, vacant, agricultural, etc. So you will be able to find all the assets on our website already. In specific reference to Spencer Square was marketed on the open market. We've had in excess of 8 offers, I believe. So the winning bidder, the tenant that we awarded the lease to, there were 7 or 8 other underneath them that would have signed up to very similar terms. So although the rent-free period was used as an incentive to bring that inward investment into the asset, there were other tenants that were lined up to take that property on the same terms. So it is that sort of element of market competition there.
So I'm assuming there it was based on who we can get the most money from and get them to do the most work without actually helping them return a dilapidated building, which basically belongs to the people of Thanet, and turn that into a successful business going forward. So I know there are many properties that are in a dilapidated state which may not have the same level of input, and I think it's really important that we try to help some of these people that are prepared to take on our businesses to turn these buildings around, because we don't have the money to do that with all our assets. So I'll just make that point and move on to my next question. Do we ever increase the rent during the letting process, i.e. to push the rent up when potential leaseholders are many? So we've just mentioned Spencer Square. I don't know whether that rent was pushed up or not, because that's a process that's beyond us. But I would be pretty horrified if we offered an initial rent and then we found, because we had several people bidding, we somehow managed to push it up. Because again, we need to look at who's going to be the best leaseholder, and it's not just a matter of raising the most money. There should be an element of social profit. I'll use Spencer Square again. That building and those tennis courts have now become the heart of the community on the West Cliff. There wasn't anything there. It's supporting disabled people, elderly people who've been isolated in their homes. So there's a massive element of social profit within that one asset, and I think that could be repeated across the authority. Certainly my experience of Ellington Park is another area where that asset has got a massive social profit element. So when we advertise a property for rent, imagine we advertise that property for 10,000 annual rent. Do we ever try to push it up as a consequence of having many people wanting that property?
The short answer is no. However, if we receive offers that are in excess of our asking price, we've got to consider all offers received, whether they're under the asking price. People could make us offers underneath, but they could also increase their offers. So we wouldn't change the price halfway through marketing and just increase it. That's not in adherence with the agency law. We have to make all fees and charges payable. Advertise them in advance at the point of marketing. So we wouldn't change the asking price, but we would consider and entertain and eventually potentially accept offers that are more than our asking price.
My last question, we've got some really good leaseholders that are really doing a great job with some of our assets, keeping them clean and tidy and well maintained. But sometimes our leaseholders are affected by situations that are outside their control. So I've had a situation where a property's suffered some flooding, another situation where a property's been affected, or their business has been affected by a long-term road closure. Do we ever support the decent leaseholders with perhaps a reduced rent over a period of time to enable that leaseholder to stay in that property and keep doing the brilliant work they're doing?
Unfortunately, that's not within my gift. However, we always advocate and we inform all of our tenants at the point they take on a lease, they need to take out insurance, and business continuity insurance will cover all instances, like you've explained about flooding and not being able to operate due to road closures. That's why we make sure that our tenants do get their insurance in place, and that's what that's there for.
And the last thing is probably just a bit of a statement here. I agree with colleagues that have actually said the concept of social profit is a really important one, and certainly if we've got community groups where the rent is just too great for them to continue and a whole load of people are going to be negatively affected by this, then we really should be building in some element of social profit. We need to find some way of monetarising that. My experience of a lot of the properties that exist in our ward and Ramsgate is that most of them live local, the leaseholders, and most of them employ local people. And most of them offer services for local people that are beyond just providing food or activities. So can we in the future look at building in some kind of social profit element of the rent review to look at how they might be offering an additional service? So it could be that you run a business that's actually got a toilet on the seafront that provides toilet facilities, clean, maintain toilet facilities in an area where we don't have any toilets.
Unfortunately, under valuation standards, I cannot quantify for social value. That is an element that's is been discussed by valuers brighter than myself for many, many years. It's really, really difficult to quantify that. And how far do you go? Do you quantify locally, but then the income for the council is distributed across services more widely? So it's really, really tricky to quantify that. However, at the process of reviewing the offers when we've marketed a property on the open market, we would always consider the existing use and how that would be affected. So we can get higher offers from something that would be completely inappropriate in that setting. So I'm just going to take a wild example here and say for Spencer Square, we might have received a bid from someone that would have been double the asking price, but they would have wanted to open a nightclub in the middle of a residential area. We would take that into account, and the social value could be quantified that way, that we take into account the existing use, and also if there's need for change of use, etc., we'd always discuss that with our planning team, just to make sure that we're not sort of doing stuff that contradicts one another in the department.
Yeah, Councillor Curry, and I'll come back to you.
Thanks, Chair. I just wanted to ask whether there will be a review, an update of the current asset disposal list. We've got a couple of assets in my ward, Cliftonville West, that have sort of languished on the asset disposal list for a long time. They don't seem to have any real interest, but I mean, just the one it might come into this area, which is the car park in Harold Road, where there's public toilets as well. I just went on a site visit to the car park with a couple of local residents recently, and who would be interested in and possibly leasing out car park spots. The toilets, I spoke to a few council workers who've used the public toilets, and they said they would absolutely be lost without this facility. So many of the council workers use the toilets, and they pointed out that they are basically in really, really bad condition now. The roof is starting to to get really bad, and so just wondered if there would be an update of that asset disposal list that's now a few years old. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. Very good point. Indeed, the asset disposal list does have quite a few properties that have been on there for a little while now. It doesn't mean that because they're on that list, we are actively marketing them for sale or for a disposal via long lease. It just means that at some point we received cabinet approval to dispose of that asset. But I will take this away and review.
Councillor Manus.
Thank you, Chair. I'm really quite pleased with what I've been hearing this evening, so thank you, Andrea. I think I had a suspicion that you might have inherited a poisoned chalice, and I have heard not actually even apocryphal stories, but stories of underletting and subletting assignments where people were parting with huge sums of money because the lease or the license agreement was so far below market value. So hopefully it does sound like we're getting a handle on that, and that's being addressed. Can I just ask, where are we up to with all of our rent reviews? I know you've not been there for that long yet, but have you had chance to get your head around all of the pending and outstanding rent reviews and make some progress on those? That's one question. Do we have a current valuation on the TDC's property portfolio, and do we look at the return on investment? Do we actually have some empirical numbers to actually look at and say and give ourselves an indicator of how well we're doing? Would it make sense to separate out the purely commercial aspects of the property portfolio from the more social aspects? So that's another question. And just whilst we've got you here, because it's a pleasure to see you here this evening, the issue with toilets that Councillor Wing brought up, making an allowance for that, is it not possible when TDC is negotiating leases or licenses, whatever, with prospective tenants, to insist that toilet provision during certain operating hours is a condition of the lease? So.
Trying to remember the first question. Apologies.
It was the housekeeping on where we're up to with the schedule of rent reviews. So we have a schedule of outstanding, pending, imminent rent reviews. Was the first question.
Thank you. Just from the top of my head, we have 12 outstanding rent reviews for 23-24 this year. So that number has been has seen some activity on it, and is considerably less than what I've inherited, and also comparatively to previous years, we are ahead of the curve in terms of our rent reviews. In regards to the values of our assets, yes, we do a valuation every year. It's called an accounting capital value valuation. Most of our headline assets, so the assets that are worth more, they're valued on a yearly basis, and the remaining of the portfolio is valued on a 5-year cycle. So 20% of it is valued every year. But we do renew those valuations every year, and they are done independently, so there is no element of subjectivity to our valuations here.
Could you just let me know where we would find those valuations? And one last point with just the general housekeeping of the portfolio. Do we have any policing of underletting or assigning where it's not permitted under the terms of the main lease with TDC? And where we've got errant tenants who aren't maintaining or insuring the buildings properly, do we not have personal guarantees from the as part of the standard process? It would. I mean, as you're aware, it would be normal that you give a personal guarantee, particularly where it's a limited company of even a small, even medium-sized company. Directors would be expected to give guarantees.
Unfortunately, the accounting capital value valuations are not available for release. They're held very tightly by our finance team, so I'm sure Chris would step in if that's not the case. But the accounting capital valuations are used for our internal purposes, so they're not available to the public. In regards to policing unauthorised sublettings or underlettings or alienation of any part or full property, we do rely massively here on reports from the public, or reports from neighbouring tenants. So if you are aware of any, please let us know. We can then look into that and identify straight away.
Councillor Austin.
And I just pick up on that last point. We're not the public, we're the council. So I think if a member has a reason to ask a particular question, I'm assuming they could come to you, Chris, and you could explain whether or not they were able to access that information.
Absolutely.
Councillor Packman.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I just want to pick up on something Councillor Wing mentioned about social value / profit and kind of your response, really. It's something that I'd like to push us to do more around social value and social impact, because that demonstrates that the community or the businesses and TDC working together brings the impact to our communities. And we've got such a variety of voluntary community and social enterprise sectors that we rent to and commercial leases that we rent to. But I think we are missing a trick on demonstrating the social value and social impact that just from renting a business or a building actually brings to Thanet. And then we can then look to maybe work with our commercial leases moving forward about how we can support through grant agreements or whatever. So I would just like to pick up that point that Councillor Wing said and kind of challenge you about, can we look at that and review that and see if there is scope, not this year, I'm just saying in future years, around how we can demonstrate value and social impact. Thank you.
I think quite like to have a go at answering that question for you. So there was something I wanted to say anyway, which kind of links to this, which is that Andrea and I have been talking quite a lot about establishing some performance measures for the portfolio. So we've touched on that a bit this evening. And Councillor Manners, you asked a question about the rate of return on the investment portfolio, and we do have those figures. And we're thinking about how we could put together a suite of indicators that communicates to you and to other members, the health of the portfolio and the performance of the service. I think it'd be quite interesting to explore in that how we might include some indicators about social value. So, it could be numbers of jobs or numbers of apprenticeships or somehow the value that brings to the community. I'm not quite sure. We need to give that some thought. But I hear what you're saying. I think there is potential to include some sort of indicator across our portfolio about what's being delivered by our tenants, if we can.
Yeah, thanks, and that's really refreshing to hear. And I think that would give, you could talk about transparency around grant giving. That would open the transparency around grant, because if they're bringing that social value and social impact through letting a toilet out to our members of the public, which we don't have to do or whatever, or just open it to disabled clubs or the sports club in Broadstairs, that then gives us evidence to suggest that we're giving a grant and on return we're getting this much value. So I think that it'd be really good, and I'll be happy to link you into like HACT or whatever other tool sets that I've got experience in using to kind of help with that process. Thank you.
I'll take Councillor Davis and Councillor Wing, and I think we'll wrap it up.
Thank you, Chair. Again, relatively simple question for me, but it relates to the assignability of leases. Certainly I know that many moons ago, my family rented property, but I'm going back several generations. However, nothing could be assigned, and I think that was quite correct because it protected the council's interest in who was in there. I was quite amazed, if not horrified, 2 or 3 years ago to see one of our beachfront cafes, I think it was either Dumpton or Louisa Bay, but advertised in an agent with a 6-figure premium on the residue of the lease with the council. I don't think that could be in any way in our interests anyway, because who knows who would take that on, plus the fact, was that somebody pushing their luck? Because I'm aware, I think Spencer Square, when the new lessee went in there, the person that was in there before wasn't who had done the deal with the council. Are they allowed to do that? Are these non-assignable leases, which I would have thought would have protected our interests and the quality of the tenant better?
The modern type of lease has a provision that's built in as standard, which is imposed by the lease code. This says verbatim, assignment is prohibited without the landlord's consent, which cannot unduly be delayed or withheld. So it's basically sort of like a blanket, no, you can't assign unless we give you permission. However, we're not allowed to delay or unreasonably withhold that permission.
In what the reason was for objecting to it. But there is that provision that the council should be made aware, and it would be a breach of the lease if it were to be assigned without that permission, yeah? Because, as I say, I was quite horrified by figures that I heard people were paying each other for, you know, I mean, to be honest, where is the goodwill in a seasonal cafe? Because it's not, its value is in its location. It has no residual goodwill. And I was just concerned that there was this potential, and I saw it 2 or 3 times, this potential for people to just be getting mugged off and, you know, buyer beware, but on the other hand, it's not a good look for us. So thanks, Andrew.
Councillor Wing?
Really, it's to Bob, so I can't see you, Bob. I mean, if we can get some of the sort of reporting that we have presently in housing, which is excellent, into estates and our properties, that would help all of us, I think. One of the things I think there should be, in the same way we do resident satisfaction, we maybe should do leaseholder satisfaction, and also an element of that could be barriers to developing the business. I mean, one of the best things that came to planning was the only objection I had is it's not in my ward, was the concession on the end of Broadstairs Harbour that got planning permission to expand, which seemed a totally sensible and right thing to do, to expand that business and create a greater employment in that area and a better and an increased offer for residents and tourists. So it may be that in getting information from leaseholders that we also find if there are barriers to growing the business, and it may not be a planning application, but it could be something else. Also, are there other assets? And we spent the summer, Councillor Manners came over and helped us paint the shelters on the East Cliff. We look after the ones on the West Cliff. Ramsgate Glass actually replaced the glass free of charge at their cost, and we've got no broken windows. But while we were there, we thought we've got 40 shelters that are stunningly beautiful around the coast. And I've always had this concept of, why aren't we putting a concession on the decent shelters, so that if I run a mobile coffee company, or I want to busk in a shelter on a Sunday the 26th in June for an hour, I can log on to TDC's website and book myself a couple of hours in a shelter. I mean, obviously all the health and safety's got to be on board, but it seems to me that some of that money can then be used to maintain and keep the shelters looking stunning, because they are iconic features of our coastline that we need to do something about.
I'll deal with the first bit, if that's okay, and then I'll invite Andrea to deal with the second bit. So, yeah, I hear what you're saying about performance reporting, and, you know, we're happy to take those comments away and explore how we can incorporate some of that. You know, clearly the headlines are going to be around the financial performance of the portfolio, the performance in terms of empty units and reletting, and statutory compliance. That they are things that we are looking at. You know, there's some good ideas in there about how we might incorporate some satisfaction measures and so on. So we'll take those away and have a think about it and see what we can do to incorporate into that. I know Andrea has been working on some proposals for some shelters that previously were not let in Ramsgate. Maybe you'd like to comment on that?
Yes, absolutely. So if I just link back to what Councillor Duckworth presented earlier in terms of how we bring new properties up to the market, one of the bullet points there was heightened interest. So properties tend to have sort of a life cycle, and they come in fits and spurts, and sometimes we'll have lots of interest around shelters, and other times we'll have lots of interest in just sort of park concessions or street food trading, etc. So at the moment we are working on new shelters, so we've seen some interest in our local shelters, so we are using the Ramsgate concrete shelters on the prom. We've just launched that this week. We've got lots and lots of interest and many ideas to go through and evaluate. So this is definitely something we look at. In terms of shelters that are beautifully ornate, they're most likely listed, which sometimes can be a barrier to sort of changing the use of that. But I think the most important thing that we are working on at the moment with our technical services department is around identifying those shelters that need to remain as shelters and not change, and then look at the other shelters that we are left that are not particularly used as shelters and would be supported by planning for ancillary uses.
Very quick one.
It will be very quick, and it was just to say I welcome the concrete shelters, the 20th Century Shelters Initiative, because they are potentially of a value. I think we need to remember that and identify again, even within those pedestrian shelters, the ones at Ramsgate, for instance, were gifted originally, I believe, by Dame Janet, but they are covered benches and they're there for people as they walk and perambulate and the less mobile to rest. So whilst I'd be all for letting the bigger ones or something that had a potential commercial use, I think that the very simple, ornate, original Edwardian shelters should be kept, and we should make sure we keep those as that for the benefit of the people, which is what they were put there for originally. Others, like perhaps not the Nayland shelter, the other one, the Walpole and so on. Yes, but anyway, thank you.
Very quick, Councillor Mellors.
Just referring back to what Councillor Davis had said on the subletting and assignment of these leases, it does raise a big red flag when there are these huge premiums being asked, because it calls into question whether our rent reviews are being done properly and timely. Because the main reason that your assignment is worth, you can get a premium on the assignment, is because the property is undervalued. So that would raise a big red flag, and hopefully that does raise a big red flag here, because that would call into question the criteria that we're using for the valuations if we are up to date with our rent reviews. So I'm just hoping that that's a symptom from past failures where we haven't necessarily kept up to speed with rent reviews and the current market rents. But I just would welcome some clarification on that to confirm that is indeed the case.
So assignment is not directly linked to rent reviews. Rent reviews is just the method of setting the rent. It doesn't give the tenant any rights or any business continuity or any security of tenure over that property. That is the Landlord and Tenant Act 54. And if the historical lease has been in place for 25 years, and the tenant has got rights to renew, they have monopoly over that area. So the premium that you may have seen advertised doesn't refer to a profit rent that the tenant may be enjoying at the moment. It's probably more to do with the monopoly over the area and the fact that they're the sole occupier of that asset within a certain distance, and they are the only ones that are able to enjoy those benefits and attract those customers. So the premium is not necessarily reflected in the rental level. It's more to do with the location of the property and the other benefits as part of the lease terms they may have. So they may have a protected tenancy inside the Act, which adds value to that rent, which is why it's attractive for potential new operators to take that assignment on.
I see it in more black and white terms, that if somebody, I heard of a case, I don't know whether apocryphal or not, but I spoke to the chap that was claiming to be writing the cheque, of £250,000 changing hands for a beachfront cafe for the remainder of the licence agreement or the lease agreement. And to my mind, that just suggests that the rent is too low, because if someone's prepared to step in and take over the lease and pay £250,000 for the privilege, it can only suggest that the rent is too low, and that the rent should take into account the exclusivity of the area and all the other things that you've mentioned should be reflected in the market. That should be the market price for the rent that TDC should be charging. So that's my point on that I'm hoping that we are squeezing and getting full market value. These are where it's commercial assets that aren't demonstrating any other community or social benefits.
Yes, absolutely. And going back to what Bob has said, that's what we're building into our KPIs at the moment. That's what we're working on to try and sort of showcase how commercial we are and how we can achieve that commercial rent. I think I know the case that you're referring to. There may be other elements there. There could be just a ground rent. So the property is not owned by TDC. We just own the land and the tenant owns the property on the land. So there could be other factors that would influence that premium. And just because someone's willing to pay more money than what the current tenant is paying, it doesn't necessarily mean that that's an undervalue. There's always going to be someone that's willing to pay a little bit more or willing to buy a property at a higher price. That's why we have gazumping on the market and all sorts. So it's just the sort of inelasticity of the real estate market which makes the price fluctuate up and down. It doesn't mean that because a property achieved a high premium 2 years ago, that if it was going to put on the market today would achieve the same, because market fluctuates.
Councillor Green.
Sorry, I've got to ask this. There are properties on the Ramsgate East Clifftop Promenade that have received no maintenance at all, to my knowledge, for at least 8 years. Have we got any hope of some action on them?
I'm more than happy to look into it specifically, if you let me know the address. However, again, I need to go back to the lease and see what the lease term says. If the lease terms are on the basis of a full repairing and insuring, then that will be down to the tenant to carry out all repairing and insuring functions to that property. But I'm more than willing to review any case.
These are our properties, they're not leased out.
Operational. If you let me know a list, I'm more than happy to look at it.
Okay, members. Leaves me to thank Councillor Duckworth for coming along this evening, and thank you to Ms Plant as well for answers. I'm sure it's not easy having a dozen councillors for an hour questioning you, so you're clearly very knowledgeable. So thanks a lot indeed. Okay, moving on to item number 5, to adopt the new and updated current housing related policies. I'll call on Sally O'Sullivan to introduce the report.
Thank you. Hi. Right, so today I've brought 2 new policies and 3 policies that we've reviewed. The 2 new policies have been identified through lessons learnt, and the 3 current policies were due for review. The compensation policy is a new policy that applies a consistent approach to the way that that compensation is awarded, to assist our officers specifically when they feel compensation might be appropriate, to make sure that that is then applied in a consistent way. The write-off policy is a requirement that tells us how we identify and manage our former tenant arrears, and tells us what we must try to do to recover former tenant arrears before we recommend for write-off, and what authorisation levels are required for different values of write-off. The 3 reviewed policies, we looked back over the course of time to see how the policies had performed for us, to see if they had posed any issues for us during their use, or if there had been any changes to legislation, regulation or best practice. That means we would need to change the way we do things. So for our aids and adaptations policy, we have removed rent arrears as a reason to not carry out an adaptation. We have simplified the dispute process by guiding tenants to the corporate complaints process, removed the timescales for completion of various adaptations, but added our methodology for prioritisation of cases. For our ASB policy, we simplified the dispute process, again by guiding tenants to our corporate complaints procedure. And for our rechargeable works policy, we have included costs for missed appointments and included costs occurred for abuse of our repairs service. So that was a real whistle-stop tour of the policies that we're bringing forward today, if anyone has any questions.
Members, got Councillor Manners first.
Thank you, Sally. Could I just, does the compensation also apply to leaseholders where TDC is the freeholder, where people have bought under right to buy, or are we just talking here purely of what you'd refer to as council tenants?
The policy is mainly applied to council tenants, but it does describe where leaseholders would be eligible for compensation. There are areas.
Councillor Britcher.
Thank you, Chair. My question was about the compensation and write-off policies. Approximately how many people per year is this covering?
for for both policies, for compensation and write-off?
Yeah. How many people are sort of affected by those? How common is it that we need to be sorting those out?
I don't have exact figures, I'm afraid, but I can certainly find those for you and bring them forward. For compensation, it's not that many occasions where we have to apply rationale to compensate people. For the write-off, I would need to, I don't want to give you a figure that I've made up, so let me let me get that for you.
Oh, thank you.
Councillor Packman.
Yeah, thanks. I really welcome the removal for arrears for adaptations, because that is going to really kind of make serious benefits and change lives, to be honest. So I really welcome that. The only question I have is the rechargeable work order policy. Now, it says there you're going to charge tenants for works that are carried out that is their responsibility. Now, are we looking at things like hoarding, things like that, that maybe is more of a mental health condition, that judges have ordered the clearance via TDC? Is that then going to be charged to the tenant? Because I think that could slightly cause us a bit of negative publicity, maybe?
No, typically where we charge back for a tenant, it's where they have caused themselves or a guest has caused damage internally. So, for example, causing damage to a kitchen work surface or to an internal door. We do take into consideration every time we apply a rechargeable work order if there are any disability or vulnerabilities that we need to take into consideration before pushing that towards the tenant, and that would be one of those occasions. To my knowledge, well, I know that we have never recharged any hoarding works back to that tenant.
Thank you. So it's down to the officer's discretion, pretty
Yes.
much. Thank you.
Councillor Bright.
I have just a couple of questions. The first is about, I'm still relatively new to this, so my first is about the Thanet tenants and leaseholders group. How is that structured? And can you just tell me a bit more about that?
Yeah, so the Thanet tenant and leaseholder group is made up from our residents that want to get involved in the work that we do. They are properly constituted, they have a terms of reference and agreement, and they have an annual AGM, that's right, isn't it? Which we all attend and we assist to facilitate for them. We meet once a quarter and discuss the work that we're doing or anything that they want to bring to the table. It is, of course, their meeting, so they suggest items as well. We also have a performance subgroup where we bring our KPIs and other matters like these policies would have gone through our subgroup for review and scrutiny by our TTLG also.
And are they Thanet-wide? Is it one group? Yeah. The other question really was around the disabled aids and adaptations policy, whereby you say that the kind of process for putting adaptations in place starts off with KCC, social services, then an occupational therapist will take a look and decide what changes need to be made. We all know the situation at the moment with KCC. Are we seeing any kind of lack of timeliness in the recommendation for adaptation? So have we got residents at the moment who we know they need some sort of adaptation, but because of KCC's budget issues, they're not getting the occupational therapists in on time?
I think there's two parts to this answer, so I'll deal with one part and then you can maybe comment on the experience of your own service, Sally, on timescales. But there's quite a strong link between this service, aids and adaptations for council tenants, and the council's statutory service for disabled facilities grants. So effectively it's providing for the same need, but for council tenants, whereas DFGs provide for people that are owner-occupiers or in the private rented sector. Tenants can apply for a disabled facilities grant. It's a right for them to apply. However, if they do apply and we were to approve one, it has to be funded from the housing revenue account. And generally, the tenant leaseholder service aids and adaptations policy is a bit more flexible and a bit more generous. So there's no real reason why a tenant would apply. I'll give you that background because this does link quite closely to that policy, which later this year will also be coming here for review. But the disabled facilities grants are funded from the Better Care Fund, which is specifically grant that goes through KCC to local councils to support that work. We have previously agreed, and it's in the budget as part of the housing assistance policy, that some of that money will be used to employ an in-house occupational therapist. So that adds to that, specifically to add to the capacity that KCC bring to this, because we were aware that there were long waiting lists for people to get initial assessments. So that has really helped.
That's obviously great. So good to hear.
Did you want to say anything from the experience of your service about how long people wait, or no? Okay, that's it then.
Well, in that case, thank you.
Councillor Faruqi.
Thanks so much. May I just ask about the AIDS and adaptation policy? How flexible and responsive is it? I ask because when I was on the neurology ward, I remember having many cases of patients who we'd got medically fit, but because of their neurological new diagnosis, they were unable to go back to their existing housing because of needs of wheelchairs or mobility and so on. I remember in one case I had a patient who remained medically fit but effectively in the hospital for several months. Is there any policy for that, particularly if patients are stuck in hospital or in an inappropriate place while they were trying to get back into their homes?
For the same reason, I'll answer this one, because there is funding from the Better Care Fund as well that we've earmarked specifically to support hospital discharge. So the purpose of that role is to identify the needs of somebody that's coming out of hospital and make sure that the assessments can be done to enable them to either return to their home with adaptations. And this policy is quite flexible, both in terms of minor adaptations, which can be done quite quickly if somebody needs something relatively minor to be able to return home. But it does also allow us, in extreme cases, and we have had some, where we have to do adaptations before somebody takes up a new tenancy. And we can do that as well if we need to do that.
Thanks so much.
Any further questions? No. Okay. If I draw your attention to the report, item number 5, we are asked to agree all the policies that HET's recommended. Did everyone agree? Okay. Excellent. We'll send that off to Cabinet. Okay. Moving on to item number 6, the TLS procurement, fire door replacement and related fire-rated items contract. I'll call on Sally O'Sullivan again.
Thank you. That's me again. So this, what we want to do here is procure a contract that will replace the fire doors in our low-rise flatted blocks. The value is expected to be in the region of £3.9 million, and this will be spent over the next 6 to 7 years. Therefore, we've got a value of approximately £600,000 per year. The programme is to replace fire doors, which includes the flat front doors, internal communal doors, storage cupboard doors, electrical riser cupboards, loft hatches and meter boxes. Much of the 6-year programme has been identified through our fire risk assessments, and these are assessments that we have to have carried out at intervals that are dictated by the fire risk presented by the block, and this is laid out to us in legislation. We also have a need to replace doors on an ad hoc basis when they fail or if they are damaged. Fire doors play a really important role in the compartmentation of a building. Compartmentation splits a block up into sections, so if there is a fire in one section, the compartmentation will hold back smoke and fire for 30 to 60 minutes, depending on whereabouts in the structure it is. This means if there is a fire in a corridor, if there was an occupant in their flat, they would be protected for a minimum of 30 minutes, which would allow time for the fire service to arrive and provide assistance. By procuring this contract, we can look to achieve better value for money through economies of scale, and we intend to hold an open procurement campaign inviting eligible contractors to tender via the Kent Business Portal. Teeth back in. Is there, if anyone's got any questions on that report? Thank you.
Members, Councillor Wright.
I actually do, sorry. £600,000 a year on fire doors sounds a huge amount. Is this a rolling thing, or have we fallen behind in our replacement of fire doors? And if so, what caused that, if we have?
We have fallen behind in the replacement of fire doors, and this is a legacy issue from East Kent housing days. Essentially, we have many outstanding FRA actions which we've put into a programme of works. We've been working to build a specification for the doors. Well, they're fire door sets, which is why they're more expensive. We need to replace for a specific door and the frame to make sure that it is completely tight to not allow smoke and fire through. I can't remember where I'm going with this. And yeah, so we've been trying to procure this contract for a while to get it into place to address the legacy actions that we have outstanding.
Okay,
basically.
so we're sorting stuff out.
Any further questions? Okay, can we all note the report then, please, members? Okay, thank you. Thanks, Ms O'Sullivan. Thanks. Okay, moving on to item number 7, the Newington Community Centre project. I'll call on Ms Askew to introduce the report.
Thanks. So on Thursday this week, Cabinet will receive the report that can be found in Annex 1 of Item 7 in your agenda pack. It outlines a proposal to carry out refurbishment works to the Newington Centre, which is part of the housing estate. This property is coming forward now on the basis that survey work of the building for the Ramsgate Levelling Up Fund project have identified works that are required. These works will upgrade the energy efficiency of the building and will lead to lower operational costs for the centre in the long term. The works will also improve accessibility of the building and will create some one-to-one offices for wellbeing sessions. This project is directly delivering in one of Thanet's most deprived wards and is supporting people within the local economy to access further training opportunities in order for them to be able to take advantage of the jobs that are being created through our wider regeneration programmes. An additional £300,000 from the HRA capital budget will be requested as part of the budget monitoring report to full council on the 28th of March, and the funding will come from the HRA major repairs reserve. In accordance with the Council's key decision framework, this report is being presented here before a decision will be made at Cabinet. Further approvals will be sought for the required works for the existing building and the Levelling Up Fund, as it will be a key decision in accordance with the Council's decision framework. Members of the Overview and Scrutiny Panel are invited to review and scrutinise the report being considered by Cabinet on the 14th of March, making any agreed recommendations for consideration by Cabinet. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Members, Councillor Green.
Yeah, fully support what's being proposed here, but does the money have to come from the HRA when we could be spending it on providing more accommodation? Is there another source of money, such as what was announced recently in the budget?
Thanks. So as I've said, the funding is coming from the major repairs reserve. So that's kept for repairs of buildings within our HRA programme, rather than the creation of new residential dwellings. And we have looked at other sources of funding. We have been working with the Community Association there to apply for some sustainability funding that will help to deliver some of the sustainability elements within the list of works that we've identified in the Cabinet report. So hopefully that may well reduce the funding that you highlighted in terms of the budget. We're still waiting for further information on that programme, and we will probably bring that to a councillors' briefing once we have a bit more information. It's still a little bit of the unknown, and we are meeting with the relevant department to find out a bit more information.
Councillor Whitehead, did you want to come in? Sorry, I'll come to you in a second.
I'm not sure if yeah, okay, it's working. Yes, just to come back on the HRA point, as the property is within the HRA, it's the repairs reserve that would be used to maintain it anyway. That's already within that portfolio, and we wouldn't be using that funding towards purchasing because it's to look after the properties that we currently have within our portfolio. Hope that helps. Thank you.
Was that what you wanted to say?
Pretty much, yeah.
Okay, members, any more questions? Councillor Austin.
Can I just say well done, this is really good. The Newington project is such an exciting one. They do such great work at the Community Association. Thoroughly support this. Thank you.
Councillor Bright.
So again, to Councillor Austin's point there, how does this compare the kind of services we're offering? So you're talking about having offices for one-to-one wellbeing sessions. How does that compare to what's being currently offered?
So in terms of the building, at the moment, it's pretty much one open space. So you can only ever have one thing going on at any one time. The Levelling Up Fund scheme is adding an extension onto the building that will mean there'll be activities particularly around the creation of a kitchen, so training facilities around that can happen while something else happens within the building, but there needs to be some work to improve accessibility into the building, and these individual offices will allow some of the kind of community members to work with some of the residents in the area whilst there's other things that are happening in and around the building. So it makes it a bit more, it improves the operation of it and allows more diverse activities to take place.
So who's providing the services? So when you talk about wellbeing services, is that Family Hub KCC or is it?
Thanks. So it's the Newington Community Association. They have the lease for the building, and they are working with the Starlight Trust to improve some of what they're offering within the site, build their capacity. So they have a successful big local programme that's being delivered out of the centre, and they are able to, because they're a trust, they're able to go for other pots of funding to support some of the delivery that they're doing on site.
Councillor Everett, you indicate you want to come in?
Yeah, just to be helpful, I mean, obviously it is my ward, so I'm well aware of the Newington Community Association and all the great work they do. Members may not be aware that they offer a community lunch every Wednesday afternoon at 12:30 for a £5. And I would certainly recommend anybody to come along and partake. You need to let them know in advance so they can cater for numbers. 2-course meal cooked in the kitchen by Mike the chef with members of the local community. Excellent value, very good quality food, and it's a good opportunity to see exactly what's going on at Newington, and I'm sure they'd be delighted to see any member of the council or indeed any officer there. Thanks.
Excellent. Any more questions, members? Okay, so we're asked to make any recommendations, so I presume there's nothing we want to add to that. Okay, so we'll send that off to Cabinet. Okay, thank you, Ms Askew, for that presentation. Okay, moving on to item number 8. The Department of Levelling Up Housing and Communities externally funded projects approvals procurement. Okay, I'll call on Mike Humber to introduce the report. Over in the corner there.
Thank you, Chair. So this report invites members of the Overview and Scrutiny Panel to review a report to Cabinet, which will be considered later this week on the 14th of March. The Cabinet report can be found at Annex 1 to the OSP report. The report recommends that Cabinet approve expenditure that's above the key decision threshold for services that will support the delivery of Ramsgate and Margate levelling up funded projects. The projects are all part of the Simplification Pathfinder pilot that has been previously approved by Cabinet. The capital funding is already allocated within the Council's approved budget, and this report is therefore about the key decision to spend, not the allocation of budget or the business case for that allocation. The subject of the expenditure includes the project management of the next phases of the Levelling Up funded projects, those being the technical design, the construction and the handover phases. The report also requests approval to procure design team services. This is the engagement of design teams for the remainder of the design and delivery period. Also included is the award of a contract for a specialist RoRo berth survey, and this is the survey work which will inform the detailed design for the berth refurbishment as part of the port infrastructure project. Lastly, the report refers to cost consultant services. Cost managers provide services in the process of planning, estimating, budgeting and controlling costs in support of completing the project within the approved budget. The services that are proposed to be procured are fundamental to the continued progress of the LUF programme of works. Such project management and development services are allowed for and included within the Levelling Up programme budget. I think it's also worth mentioning on that point that the Levelling Up Fund bid wouldn't have been successful if it hadn't had an allocation of funding that was at an industry standard sort of proportion for the delivery of these sorts of elements of the projects. For most capital projects, services will be required such as design teams, project managers and cost consultants, along with activities on site such as inspections of assets. And the Council does not have all of these specialist services in-house, which is why they often have to be outsourced. On a programme of this size, the value of some of these services will be above the Council's key decision threshold and therefore will be taken to Cabinet for approval. And this shows good governance in terms of the assurance that we are providing to central government and the way in which we are managing delivery of this programme. The report highlights that the value of the berth survey work tenders received was higher than the estimated value. The report describes the likely reasoning behind this and also highlights that a proportion of the value of the tender returns is for provisional sums, and those provisional sums will only be expended at the client's discretion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Councillor Everett.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to be here for the scrutiny meeting last month when there was a discussion about Ramsgate Port, but I thought I'd take this opportunity to, I think I'm going to change mics. That one's a bit echoey, that one's better, good. So I thought it was probably useful to come along and provide a bit of context. I'm only going to talk about the aspects of this report that refers to the port infrastructure. It's quite a technical report, but I think also we need to keep our eyes on the high level objectives here. As you all know, the port project was part of the Levelling Up bid in 2021, and the current methodology for proceeding it was approved by the previous Conservative Cabinet, and it's fair to say that we've proceeded on an entirely cross-party basis on this. The Conservative and Labour front benches at different times and at the same time have agreed that this was the right way to proceed. It is probably I think it definitely is the most complicated of the Levelling Up projects. It is really challenging technically in terms of the scale of it, in terms of the legal side of it, and Mr Humber is doing a sterling job, and all the other people associated with the project are doing some great work. I think we need to emphasise that the money that we're looking to spend now on the survey work is money that we've got from the government to do work on the port. It's not money that we could be spending on other council services. It's not money that we raise from the council tax. It's money that we've been given for this purpose. So obviously we want to behave in an efficient and cost-effective way as possible, but that's what this money's for, and we have to obviously operate in the market, and if this is the market price of the services we need, then obviously we have to be prepared to find that money. Where we're heading is to get to a position where we can balance the costs and the affordability of the work against the benefits and the demand from an operator to run this part of the port for us. And this work will enable us to reach that. It's half of the process. The other half, of course, is the appointment of an operator, and the important thing is that we bring the two things together so that we don't commit to make the bulk of the expenditure without any certainty around whether there's an operator for the port, and we don't commit to doing work that is unaffordable for an operator. So we need to align the two things together. I think that there's been a lot of focus going through the process on whether there is demand for the port services, whether there are ferry companies out there who want to come forward. What's emerged for me through the process is that that isn't the challenge. The challenge is the infrastructure work affordable? And we will only find that out by doing the survey work and understanding precisely what it is we need. So that's what we're looking at. There may be other ways than the levelling up funding that we can source some of the funding that's needed for the infrastructure work, but until we find out what that cost is and nail down who is going to come forward and operate the port, it's quite hard to tally those up and to come to a conclusion. I listened to the previous discussion. We seem to centre around previous failures of ferry operations. We're not looking for a ferry operator. We're looking for a port operator, and I think it's reasonable to assume that if a port operator doesn't have a ferry operator, they're not going to take on the port. But what we've tried to do is outsource the risk, and there were pros and cons to that, but that was deemed to be the right approach, and I think personally it is the right approach. So if there is nobody out there who wishes to use Ramsgate Port, we can be fairly confident that we won't get a port operator and the project will not proceed. And the other thing I think we should be fairly confident about is that the people who have talked to us about operating Ramsgate Port and who we expect to come forward in the next stage of the process know what they're talking about. That they have a reasonable idea of what Ramsgate Port is, where it is, and what it can do, and what it's done in the past. So I don't think we should be too distracted by arguments that it isn't suitable for the services which we're putting forward. The final thing I want to say is I think it's important we have an open mind. Projects have their own momentum. We've got funding for this project, we've taken it forward. If we get to a stage in the summer where it can't proceed because it isn't affordable, or for argument's sake we don't have an operator, then clearly it won't happen. But at the moment we're all working to make it happen. I think it would be a mistake if the council said it will happen under all circumstances, at any price, and we will make sure it happens. We're not saying that because we're not able to say it. And I think it would be equally stupid to say we should stop this now, there's never any chance of it succeeding, we should abandon all the work we've done, waste all the money that's been spent on it and give up now. So I think what we've got now is a proposal to move forward, get the information, and I hope that the Scrutiny Committee will support that and Cabinet will support it on Thursday. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Everett. Members, Councillor Davis.
Thank you, Leader. Interesting, and thank you for clarifying your position, which obviously hasn't changed. I'm very interested that you say there's been long-term interest in using the port, and that all that's held us back is, I'm going to change mics, all that's held us back is lack of funding and support from the government, because of course we did have the Seabourn debacle where they offered us millions and had to pay out. However, if this is the case, why are we using, and I've asked this before, because levelling up money is designed to give us an outcome for community benefit, and it's really seed money to attract inward investment. If this port is so viable, why in 2020 did we not, or did we, and were we turned down for money from the Port Infrastructure Fund, which was a government scheme? I think I can actually read you what it said. There we go. It's to enable maritime ports, airports and international rail terminali handling goods imported from the EU to access funds to build the necessary infrastructure and facilities to enable customs and sanitary and phytosanitary checks to be carried out at ports following the end of the transition period. That money was made available, 53 ports applied, 41 were successful and 200 million was allocated. If all we were waiting on was money and the demand was there, firstly, did we apply for that? And if not, why not? And why are we applying levelling up money to it? Also, I notice in the report there's a reference to 130,000 in the existing tender for a report on berths 2 and 3. That's previously been referred to as 100, so which is it? And is that money part of the new proposal to approve over 250,000? Is that part of that, or is it in addition to that? So it's simply we've got an evolving, I'm seeing you nod, Leader, and thank you, I'll take you to interact on that. So this is an evolving assessment of what's necessary, yeah?
Thank you, Councillor. So starting with the Port Infrastructure Fund, I'm trying to think back. Is that the funding that was in connection with free ports? Was it that funding?
No,
it was something.
It was just for all ports to upgrade.
Okay. I don't know off the top of my head is the answer about that funding. So I think that's something we'll have to respond to separately. I mean, but in terms of why it was included in the levelling up, of course, it's part of the whole Ramsgate levelling up programme. The three elements to the £19.8 million levelling up programme, and that has been obviously that was part of the bid. The bid was scored and the bid was successful, so it meets the criteria of the levelling up fund, levelling up funding. You mentioned about berth 2, 3, and so the £130,000 in that report is about the estimated value of the survey work that we're about to do, and what the report says is that the tenders have come in more than that, and that part of the report says part of the reason for that, we believe, is because some of those specialist bits, which are specialist survey work like MPI survey, ultrasonic thickness testing, diving, that sort of thing, are probably safety boat services, I think, as well, are probably higher than we had anticipated. But the major part of it is around the fact that included in that tender figure is provisional sums. So actually, when you start out, the provisional sums aren't part of what you assume that you're going to spend. That is wholly at the client's discretion. So at our discretion, whether we need to use those provisional sums, and roughly they're between a quarter and a third of the value of the tender. So if effectively you can knock that off the tender figure before you start. So it actually brings it closer to that 130,000 figure than it might seem.
Okay, so but has it cost now? I remember seeing a figure of 100,000 on the tender that was out in January, which I believe is leading us forward to where we are. So has it cost us 100,000 to get to where we are?
No, so there's been no expenditure to date.
This is just tenders and expression of it.
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
It's okay. And sorry if the question's naive, but there's nothing wrong with naive and straight question.
We haven't spent anything yet.
So we haven't spent any anyway, and I know the leader has repeatedly. Yeah. And I do take on board the comments. I mean, let's be quite clear. I think we'd all have a vision of, as I've said before, cocktails on the poop deck, sitting in the sunshine. The evidence that's been made available would suggest otherwise, but that's not what we're here for. With regard to the expressions of interest for the Green Campus, there was the exercise, which I believe a couple were received. I would like to just point out and ask if you could look at something, because there is a credible organ or group that have contacted me several times because they cannot get an answer, and they didn't get a response at the time, and they cannot get an answer despite several emails as to what the status is of that application, and they just want to confirm that they're on your list. Maybe if I could write to you separately on that, but they have tried to contact several times and have not had a response from the officer concerned. So I just wanted to raise that, because where we're looking at moving forward, that I'm aware of some very credible people,
Okay, I'm going to defer to Louise to answer that, if that's okay.
Thanks. So it wasn't an expression of interest process, it was a prior information notice. So that allows the council, through the procurement process, to test the view of operators in the marketplace. Ask specific questions about how they might run the Green Campus as an operation, what things they might need as part of that to help inform what our tender documents look like. So we put a prospectus together, which was advertised with the link to the PIN, and we use that quite often in testing procurements. So it wasn't an expression of interest process. So none of the organisations that responded are necessarily going to be an operator. It's helping us inform the process that we then take out to the market, and or may not take out to the market and decide to deliver it internally. So that's why we use those kinds of processes to inform the next step. So if they're contacting procurement, then it will go through the portal, because that's the formal process of which to do that. And I'm not sure we've had anything from the procurement team to say we've had one of the people that have responded to the PIN contact us, so it might be that they're not necessarily going through the right process. I'm happy for you to give them my contact details and we can follow that up. But as I said, they've not missed out on anything because it's not an expression of interest process.
Thanks, Louise, because obviously that was, and they were very frustrated at not getting a response, but what you've just told me means we can give them one, so which obviously that courtesy they'll be pleased with. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Green.
This step-by-step process that we're going through before we commit the major money seems eminently sensible to me, and I appreciate the transparency of it. But there is another item that, with regard to the likely impact on Ramsgate Town, environmental impact, etc., that I would like to see done at some point before we commit to the project. I don't think this is the point where it should be done, but I would like an assurance that it is on the agenda somewhere.
Okay, yeah, thank you, Councillor Green. So I think what you're talking about is environmental impact of the reintroduction of
Yes.
of shipping. Is that,
Yes,
is that what,
yeah.
of large shipping?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. I mean, yeah, it's you know, I understand the point. I mean, it's worth saying that that cross-channel shipping has operated from the Port of Ramsgate for 40 years until it ceased in 2013. Since then, the MARPOL regulations have meant that shipping in the channel is cleaner than it was then, because before it would have been heavy fuel oil that was burnt, which has much higher sulphur emissions. So what we're talking about now is vessels that will either burn low sulphur fuel or they'll burn marine gas oil, which again is much lower sulphur than the heavy fuel. So those regulations require all shipping through the channel to switch over. If they're a heavy fuel ship, they have to switch over to those lower sulphur fuels in the channel. So what I'm saying is the picture is much better than it would have been 10, 20 years ago before those regulations came into place. But I understand the point. Thank you.
It's not just that. I mean, I'm very conscious of the impact on Dover, for instance. So there are many aspects of the trade that could impact on the town.
If I just briefly come back as well, there is a point about ports and air quality and the requirement for an air quality management plan. The level of shipping that we're talking about from the Port of Ramsgate might be below the level required. It probably is below the level required for an air quality management plan, but I think it's absolutely a point that I'll take away.
Councillor Wing.
I mean, I wanted to speak about something else, but I'll just follow on from what Councillor Green said. It's not just about the ferries, though, is it, coming in? It's about possible road traffic movements to and from the ferry, which have the potential to have a massive impact on the town of Ramsgate's transport system. But also, if we're looking at cargo, unattended cargo, unaccompanied cargo, then we're talking about lots and lots of lorry movements. And when that tunnel is shut, that will be further impacted because the lorries will be going through the town. So it's not just about the ship arriving and the ship leaving and the environmental impact there. It's about what may be coming off the ship and going through town, or indeed sitting on the port. I'm not going to bang on too much because I've got about as much confidence of a ferry coming in as I have an airplane coming into that other famous asset that's left to rot that begins with M that I won't mention. What worries me, I'm glad that I do think we need to burst the bubble. I think it's absolutely tragic that we have to spend a significant amount of money surveying assets again in the port that we've previously spent
a fair amount of money on and nothing's happened. So that bit really grates with me. But I think I'm now confident that we are going to burst the bubble either way. The things I worry about are future liabilities. So there may be a ferry operator out there that wants to use the port of Ramsgate because nobody else will let them in. And so I worry about the type of cargo that might be coming in, because I've got no confidence in us bringing a ferry into the port because they're just too big and we're too small. So I have worries about future financial liabilities and worries about the type of cargo that could be coming into and out of the port. But I'm glad the leader said, you know, this is the final spend of money. If we don't get an operator, and an operator which is economically viable and doesn't create hazards, potential hazards for the residents, particularly of Ramsgate, then we need to do this, and we need to be brave enough to draw a line under it and say, that's it. So going forward, do we have a plan B, and are we presently parallel running that plan B, so that if, as I believe, the whole venture fails, we've got another set of ideas that we can implement on the port?
Okay, thank you, Councillor. I'll try and run through those points. So the first thing about, I think you talked about lorry movements and the impact of those. Of course, again, you know, this is an operational port. It hasn't stopped being operational. There's still lorry movements now, but what we're talking about is an increase back to a higher level. It perhaps won't be as high as the you know, certainly initially as the levels that we've seen before through the port. And of course, those vehicles then were not as efficient. You know, they weren't probably Euro 6 diesel engines. A lot of those vehicles went through the town because the tunnel was only completed in 1999 and the port ran for 19 years before that. And you know, as things progress, vehicles are becoming more efficient. We've got electric vehicles coming through and things like that. So generally, that's an improving position in terms of the impact from emissions from vehicles. When it comes to the tunnel itself, at the moment it's closed fairly frequently, and that results in traffic going through the town. The closure, the timing of the closures when the port is operational with scheduled ferry service will be such that it will, as much as possible, the planned maintenance will be timed outside of the period when ferry arrivals or departures are occurring. So there's always a point in the, you know, in a ferry timetable where there's a downtime of a number of hours, and the planned maintenance will be timed then. I mean, if there's sort of reactive requirement to close a tunnel, for example, if someone goes through it, then that might still occur. But those planned closures will be timed when there's least impact. So that means that traffic shouldn't go through the town at all. It should all go out through the tunnel and out onto the main road network. Talking about, you mentioned about ferries and being too big, and that isn't an issue for Ramsgate, because what we think is most likely is that this will be a mixture of accompanied and unaccompanied freight. That's where the market has demand, and that will mean it won't mean big RoPax vessels that carry 1,000 passengers and have got bigger. There's plenty of tonnage, plenty of vessels on the on the market for charter that will fit in Ramsgate, and you're talking about vessels between 150 and 180 metres that will fit in Ramsgate. Those vessels are available on the market. Last point about Plan B. What we're doing now is we are progressing the plan that's been approved through Cabinet on the 2nd of March 2022. That's the plan we're progressing, and I think we'll continue to do that until we deliver the project, or we reach a point where, because of costs or some other reason, that it's unviable, and then we'll look at other things. But we are planning to deliver this project and continue to do that. I don't know if, Louise, you mentioned you wanted to come in on that, or is that covered that point?
Yeah, sorry.
Right, good, okay. Thank you.
Councillor Everett, you wanted to come in?
Well, I just think what's worth saying is we're not giving the money back. whatever happens, we're not giving the money back. And we have got, as you know, a range of other schemes that we could spend the money on. So I think there are two questions. One is, okay, so if there isn't a ferry operator, what about the port? But the other question is, if there isn't a ferry operator or isn't a port operator, what about the money? We ain't giving the money back. You could be very confident about that.
Just on that point then, I mean, it's good to see that the 4 million that would have gone to Dreamland, I just want to come back in on that, sorry, the 4 million that went to Dreamland will stay in Margate, which is where it should rightly stay in Margate. So am I assuming that if the ferry idea fails, that all that money will stay within Ramsgate? Thank you.
Councillor Bryant.
I was just going to say that, Councillor Wing. Broadstairs could do with a few bob. I think the point I make, or it's kind of a question and a point, I will get there eventually, is around the consultations themselves and the surveys themselves. The first thing I would say is, would it be possible, I get the point that we're looking at Plan A, would it be possible for the survey to be usable for a potential Plan B, any surveying that's going to be happening? The second thing is, and I found this on our town council, being thrust into kind of a position where I'm having to make very much smaller decisions, but decisions nevertheless that bring in external contractors. I think when we are spending money on third-party organisations doing the work, it's very easy for residents to think, well, can't the council just do it themselves? Now, we get it. I think we've just got to make sure that the communication to residents, when we employ these companies to do this work, how can we effectively communicate this to the residents, that it is absolutely crucial that these specialists who know how to manage costs, who know how to manage projects of this scale and structure, are going to be employed by the council, and that in itself is a really strong use of our council money.
If it's all right, Chair, I'll take that question. I think it's a really good question, and it's something we've been putting quite a lot of thought to. I think it's probably worth saying by introduction that we're in a period where the council's expenditure on construction-related projects, both through the regeneration programmes in Margate and Ramsgate and in housing, are significantly increasing. As a consequence of that, the amount of project management resource and specialist advice and design team resources that are needed to deliver that has increased significantly alongside that. And generally, an industry norm, you could expect to spend anything between 12 and 15% of a capital budget on design team and project management costs. So we are currently doing a piece of work to review all of the design team and project management costs that we are incurring on existing live projects. And our plan is to project that forward onto projects that we know are coming downstream and over the next few years, and to review where it might be possible for us to take on some of those resources in-house. And there are some obvious examples, like architectural technician services, clerk of works services, contract administration, stuff like that, that might well pay us to recruit those roles permanently as part of the council's workforce. And if you look across the regeneration programmes, housing programmes, the property portfolio, and the whole range of other things that the council is planning to do over the coming years, there is more than enough work for some of those roles. It couldn't be applied to everything because there are some niche specialisms that absolutely need to be done by experts that we may only need a few times each year, and it's better to put those outside of the organisation to somebody that does that sort of work all the time. Another example where another reason why we might choose, actually even having done this work, to put something out is in terms of where the risk sits. So health and safety particularly, principal designer functions under the construction design management regulations. does protect the council from the risks associated with that if we recruit specialists to take on that type of role. And similarly, with things like fire risk assessments and fire engineering advice, you know, it's better to get people that do that all the time. So hopefully that helps, but you know, we definitely think there are opportunities to bring some roles in-house in the longer term.
Yeah, just to confirm, I wasn't questioning the need to bring people in. I was just acknowledging that people will question the need externally, and I think it's really good. The other point I just quickly raise is that don't forget that councillors are ambassadors for this sort of stuff. So the importance of, as we're employing organisations to come in and do this project management, let's have full members briefings so that we can actually say, hold on, when we're out in our surgeries and whatever and people are raising stuff, we can say, hold on, this 250 grand or whatever is going to be really well spent because this is how we guarantee that a project is going to be delivered.
Sorry, Chair, if I can also just add to that as well. You asked Councillor about the survey specifically, and that is an excellent example of where we couldn't have the in-house expertise. It involves abseiling, it involves diving, it involves specialist equipment to do particular testing of the piles and ultrasonic thickness testing of materials and things. This is stuff that, you know, plainly we can't do ourselves, but we can be an intelligent client and specify that work and interpret it and use it for the design.
Any further questions, Councillor Manners?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I mean, this is familiar. We've been here before, obviously, and I'm old enough to remember when Sally was resorting to selling tickets for £1 to pensioners to fill the boats, and then we had cargo that nobody else wanted. I'm that old. I remember it being built. But I also wasn't here when the Conservatives, for whatever reason, I don't know what sort of day we were having, decided that it would be a good idea to spend all this money on a port, and it was somehow a valid priority for Thanet. But that's where we are. I get it that the levelling up money is not coming directly out of the pockets of local council taxpayers. So for that we can be grateful, and I agree with the leader that we certainly shouldn't be giving it back to the Secretary of State. So my question is this: at what point are we going to draw a line under this project of throwing more and more money at it before either we've got a viable operator with ink on the contract, or we just walk away and say goodbye to it? I just think from Councillor Everett saying, you know, we've put all this money in so far and it would be wasted. It's a classic sunk cost dilemma, that money is a sunk cost. We're not going to see that back, and there comes a point when you maybe need to have a rethink, perhaps get back to the Secretary of State and look at reallocating the money back to the projects in Ramsgate that did have some merit and public support. So that was my question really. Where do we draw the line here?
Okay. I think it's coming back to some of the things that we've previously said around this, which is that we are following a decision of Cabinet and we are taking a risk-based approach to make sure that the expenditure on the works will not take place until such time as we have sort of enough confidence that there is an operator. So we've done our pre-market engagement, so we know that there's interest in the market. The next stage is to do the initial tenders for the concession to get those returns. That work runs in parallel with the design work around the berths, but it's important that we don't then commit to the works on the land side and the wet side, so the berth works and the landside port infrastructure works, until such time as we've got that confidence that there is going to be a port operator coming. So we're still in that process. So I mean, it's not the right time to talk about when we might stop that, because we're still in that process, and there's still a viable route through to the conclusion of the process that was agreed through Cabinet in 2022.
But thank you for that. But the bottom line is we're going to throw another £250,000 at this process. without having any viable operator on the hook to proceed with the port. We're spending, it's £250,000 as part of the fishing exercise.
So there are many parts to the project management, the design, the feasibility that are expenditure, if you like, at risk. But that's part of the the development of the project, and that actually is the same for all the projects. That's not peculiar to port infrastructure, and it's the same for many projects across the Levelling Up programme here and elsewhere, that you have to spend money in order to develop a project to the point you can't run a project with zero risk. That doesn't exist.
I'll bring Councillor Everett in, please.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I mean, I appreciate Councillor Manner's perspective. I don't quite think he's right when he says there's no public support for it, because I think there's quite a considerable amount of public support for it if it can be made to work. But I think it's important to say that this isn't a process that was invented by the council, and the council is the only people out there saying this can work. There's obviously been a lot of professional research gone into it and a lot of conversations with other operators. So we know that there are people who are interested in operating from the Port of Ramsgate. What we don't know until we do this piece of work is whether we can make it stack up within the funding that we've got at the moment, and if that funding isn't sufficient, whether there are other sources of funding that might close that gap. So we need to go out and find that out. I think we'd be letting down the people of Thanet in general if we just walked away from a project on the basis of scepticism from individual councils, with no disrespect. We would not have got this money in the first place if the government didn't think that there was potentially a viable future for the Port of Ramsgate. There were conversations, Councillor Davis was talking about government, there were conversations with government when I was leader previously about funding the infrastructure which we needed in order to get the port up and running for cargo to come in. Government at that stage wasn't interested in supporting Ramsgate. The market is changing. The market is changing and has changed. We know there are new pressures coming on the Port of Dover in October. With the new regulations, which are particularly around tourist entry, but I'm in meetings listening to what Dover Council are saying and what Kent County Council are saying, and they're terrified about what's about to happen in Dover in October with the new biometric tests of people leaving the country. So there's lots of different things going on. I think we need to be prepared to spend the money that's been allocated to this purpose to bottom it out. But there will be a time limit for it. Clearly, I would say that time limit is in 2024. It'd be very surprising if we were still sitting here in a year's time saying, well, shall we go and do something else? Shall we look something else? But there are other opportunities. The funding doesn't necessarily have to come from the Levelling Up Fund. And I think we need to run through the process, which is what the council's agreed to do and what the officers have been working on for a period of years now. And get to the end of that process and see what the outcome is, rather than just assume that it's not going to work. I'm still optimistic. I know the officers are still optimistic, but I don't know, and that's where I'm being honest with you. I could be wrong. It might not work, but we are going to do our level best to make it happen. If we can't make it happen, we can't.
Mr. Blundell.
Thank you, Chair. Just building on some of the points that Mr. Humber made around this is a usual process in terms of particular construction contracts and different stages that you would go through the REBA stage, and also the way that we're building our own project management assessment framework. Just in simple terms, there are various gateways that different projects need to go through, where there will be no-go or go decisions that we made. This is not a no-go, go decision with this report. This is not what we're saying around the ports overall. This is looking at decision to go ahead to spend some money in accordance with our key decision threshold. So it's not, this report, I think it's important that we're not getting sucked into a assessment of the port in principle, because that's not what this report's about. It's a key decision report, and that's what the scrutiny should be of, not of the decision around the port per se.
Thank you. Councillor Davis.
Thanks for that, and thanks for your input there, Chris. I think because I think it is important that we do keep that perspective. The worry, again, a lot of us have, and our position's well known. Let's say we're right, there's several factors here. There's the yield that comes from Ro-Ro, which historically, there's good reports that can show you this. You're looking at about £8 a metre yield, where it costs us 25 to pay the Crown Estate for what we use, where there are alternative proposals that are still maritime. I'll take you back. I mean, it's a much maligned and a certain individual tried to hijack the name of it, but the Maritime Village was about facilities that relate to the port and potentially even keeping a berth and that. But that organisation that brought that forward to the council, there's 500 million behind that. There's as much money as Manston, and that money and the document is there. And the document is within the presentation that was given that shows the source and so on, and that it is a credible thing. I think it would be good to have some comfort that those projects are still remembered. They're held in abeyance for as long as their backing is there, because if, as many of us suspect, this comes to the grinding halt that it will, the void that would be left in terms of forward progress needs an alternative. Otherwise, God knows what could fill it. I do think also, and I'd like for the record to say, Ramsgate is Ramsgate. We're not a vassal port to Dover, and I don't really care what their temporary problems are and if we're going to be handling freight, unaccompanied freight, ID and facial recognition's not a problem. Because we're not talking about handling that trade. So let's not look at spending all this money to become a temporary convenience for either Dover or some other operation. I saw a ludicrous comment by the Thames Estuary Partnership recently, where they described us as an estuary port. I think they need to look at the map and work out where we are.
Thank you, Councillor Davis. Councillor Bright.
So the question here is whether we approve the money to be spent on the surveying works, etc. Correct? So we don't need to talk about what the port is going to be used for. We need to talk about whether we want to spend this money on the survey. Correct?
It's about the next steps, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just confirming.
Yeah. Okay, there's no further questions. Can I just ask one question? I mean, I'm open-minded. I mean, I'd love nothing more than a smorgasbord on a Saturday night with everyone else. I think we'll all be there on the first night. But can I ask, what timescales are we putting on now in the tendering process before the front runner becomes known, and then we decide whether we're going to spend 10 or 12 million and putting this port right for the...
So the immediate timescales are that we have received back the tenders for the berth survey work, and that's very much on the critical path of this whole project, because the outputs of that will be the sort of detailed survey output in terms of what needs to happen to the berth, which then leads on to design. But the other output will be the estimated cost of that work, that of the actual construction work to the berth, and that will help inform the concession tender, which will then, the plan is for that to go out sort of over the summer, which will then go out to the market to invite bidders for that concession. So we are looking to have at least the initial part of the tender stage back sort of later on this year, and we will have a cost early part of the summer, a provisional cost for the works element. So they're the next sort of milestones in the project. If I could also just take the opportunity, because while we've been sitting here, we've just had a opportunity to look back at the Port Infrastructure Fund from 2020, from sort of 4 years ago. So the works we're talking about to the berth now wouldn't have been eligible for that fund, and that's, I suspect, why an application wasn't made. So they were about making ports ready for the new border operating model from Brexit. They weren't about the works to the berth that wouldn't have been eligible. So I just wanted to make that point, as we've had an opportunity to look while we're here.
So can I just ask one more question? So how many, I know you can't say who they are, but how many expressions of interest or tenders requests have we had? Is it going to be a competitive thing? Is there a fight for the tender?
Yeah. So in terms of that pre-market stage, that was before the tenders. It's not part of the formal stage, but yeah, it wouldn't be appropriate to talk about those responses, but only to say that there, we've had sort of significant interest. I think it's worth saying that there is significant interest, which leads us to believe that we will get credible responses to the tender. So the tender the concession tender process is 3 stages. So the initial stage, which will start this summer, and we'll have responses back towards the sort of the end of the summer period. There's that initial stage. Then there will be a dialogue stage where we take those initial tenders, which will have there'll be a cost element, i.e. what the income will look like. There will be a quality element, which is about what it is that they're proposing to do and the method that they will use to do that, and sort of a risk element. We'll take that information, we will enter into dialogue with those tenderers, and then there will be a final tender stage after that with those that pass that through that process, leading to an award.
So is it like Councillor Everett said, it'd be this year, we'll hear by the end of this year who it will be?
So the end of that tender stage will be either at the end of this year or possibly early next year, but the point is we'll have more information from that initial tender stage, which will be sort of towards the end of the summertime, where we will know the level of interest, and we will have tender returns that will tell us, in terms of the financial viability, we'll have that information on the financial viability of what is being proposed. And at that point we will know also the cost of the works and whether we continue onto the works, the works phase.
Thanks, Mike. Councillor Wing?
I just want to say something that might help the councillors in the room that haven't had the history of the port, that at some point we would have had to have undertaken survey work on our berths, because they get an absolute hammering every day of the year sometimes, and sometimes those northeasterlies crash into the harbour. So I think maybe the silver lining for me is that we've got government money that enables us to survey at least some of the berths, and that money would have had to have come out of residents' pockets. So that's the silver lining for me. Every cloud's got one, so maybe that helps people understand why it's okay for me to vote for this decision.
Councillor Davis?
I'd just like again to record the question and the concern I have, which is why or how we have maintained these berths in the interim years since they had 1.2 million spent on them in 2016. How have we maintained them if we've now got to spend £250,000 to assess the condition? Because to maintain them and have maintained them supposedly in a ready for service condition, we must know what that spec is. So why do we need to spend £250,000 to see what condition they're in, and assuming they need money spent on them? One of them's had no trade across it whatsoever. So whilst yet it's sitting there in the water, if it's greased and operating, there's no reason why that should need substantial investment. I do find it a bit perverse as well that, in my experience, you've always had a clear vision, a specification which you can then go and cost. We seem to be costing a notional idea and then trying to find bits of Lego to fit into the wall. But as I say, I'm just concerned why we need to spend and survey to this point if the port had been functional, which it's not. The berths have not had substantial use. The berth 2 has had a few vessels, the car boats dock on it, that's all. And berth 3 has had nothing on it. So if the port isn't fit for purpose, if 6 or 8 years of sitting there is enough to destroy £1.2 million worth of berth, I really think we seriously need to look at what we're doing.
So, Chair, I'm happy to come back on that point. Councillor Davis, so this was something that, because this is a question that we've, that we've talked about before, and this was responded to in the overview and scrutiny report on the 15th of February. It's 2.2 and 2.3 in that report, and it's worth mentioning that since that work 8 years ago, there's been £1.2 million of income on berth number 2. So there has, so that work has enabled further income at the port over that period.
Councillor Bright, did you want to come in?
Yeah, I just wanted to come back very quickly on Councillor Wing's point. you're correct. We don't have the history, but by God, we're experts by now on the port, having sat through this every session. But what I would say is I completely agree that it is great that we're able to use government money. So I fully support taking the next steps and sending this to Cabinet.
Okay, excellent. We'll just wrap that one up there then. So we're asked to make any recommendations on this report going forward to Cabinet this week. And I presume that's a no. So we'll move on to item number 9, the Department for Levelling Up Housing and Communities Externally Funded Projects Approvals, Funding Reallocation. So I call upon Ms Askew.
Thanks. Yeah, again, on Thursday, Cabinet will receive a report that's in Annex 1 of Item 9 in your agenda pack. This report outlines the requirement to reallocate funding within the town's fund monies of the Simplification Pathfinder pilot. 2 aborted projects from the approved Margate Town Deal programme mean that there is funding within the programme to reallocate to other projects. As previously set out by Cabinet, the funding will remain in Margate. At Cabinet on the 29th of February, an update report on the Margate projects was considered, and this will come to a future meeting of this panel for review. It wasn't a decision-making report, just to note updates. This is, of course, available to councillors as part of the Cabinet agenda pack from that meeting. There is 500,000 available within the coastal wellbeing intervention, which will be used to help deal with challenges from inflation impacting both the Walpole Bay Pavilion project and the skate park. These are existing schemes and will gain from an uplift in funding. 325,000 is being proposed to be reallocated to the pavilion and 175 to be reallocated to the skate park. There has been a lot of public and stakeholder interest in the Walpole Bay projects. In October last year, we hosted a public engagement event which we had over 400 people attend, and 670 surveys were also completed as part of that event. This has helped us make decisions on the early design stages and site location for the Wellbeing Pavilion. A prior information notice is currently out to the market to identify key points that need to be considered in the development of the tender pack for the construction of the skate park, and this will be used to inform our procurement processes. There is also £4 million from the aborted Destination Dreamland project, which is being proposed through the report to be reallocated within the diversifying heritage assets intervention to the Margate Winter Gardens. The future of the Margate Winter Gardens has been subject to a number of Cabinet decisions, including the engagement of a specialist marketing agency to market the Winter Gardens. We've engaged with the team to put together a revised proposal to go out to the market to promote the opportunity with the £4 million funding allocation to help unlock further private investment. As the accountable body for the projects within the Simplification Pathfinder pilot, Thanet District Council is the ultimate decision maker. However, this is following engagement with the new Thanet Regeneration Partnership Board, which met for the first time on the 1st of March. The new board wanted to ensure that the skate park would be a safe environment with a review to design out any antisocial behaviour, and that the kiosk facilities provided should support the ongoing sustainability and management costs for the park. In relation to the Winter Gardens, the Partnership Board was keen that further investment in the building should be found from third-party operators to complete a full refurbishment of the building, and that the Council should go out to market to identify an operator. Members of the Overview and Scrutiny Panel are invited to review and scrutinise the report being considered by Cabinet on the 14th of March, making any agreed recommendations for consideration by Cabinet.
Thank you, Louise. Members, Councillor Patton.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Thanks, Louise. Can I just ask a question about the £4 million into the Winter Gardens? Is that £4 million to be spent on the refurbishment directly, or is that £4 million that is going to be allocated to more consultations and things like that? Because I think the public view of this is they're fed up of seeing consultations and they're ready to see some development.
So the £4 million is intended for refurbishment works. It will be a like-for-like proposal to the Dreamland scheme in terms of the outputs that are required. So it requires match funding, there are a set number of jobs that need to be delivered. So all of those will be transferred across to the proposal. We're going out to the market to identify an operator to deliver the scheme so that we can ensure there is further match funding. As you know, we in the town deal process, when we were told by the department that we couldn't put the capital project forward for the Winter Gardens, we put in an ask for revenue funding, and we've used that to put together a full pack of information, I suspect greater than most places do when they put something out to the market, to help inform operators of the required investment, what they might need to deliver. We've got all sorts of resources there for them to use. So there isn't really a need to do anything further. We have the marketing agency already commissioned, so they're going to put together a revised proposal. We are going to put a little bit more money to it in order to make sure that we go out as far and wide as possible so that we can reach as many different organisations in the offer that we have. But there will be a grant agreement, so that will form part of the pack of information that goes out, and we've already got that drafted, and there will be other requirements that the operator need to put forward. We don't need to do much more work. Alongside it, we will probably commission some work around the heritage deficit so that we can fully understand what that heritage deficit looks like, because that will help inform that kind of operator requirement that's put into the building. But we've got that revenue funding to do that.
Just one more question. I know you went to market in the summer for the Winter Gardens. What was the response like? And I don't need a direct number, I don't know, but just was it a good response?
There was a lot of interest. The agents had a number of discussions with all kinds of organisations in the building, and they held viewings, and they had, I think, 2 days for viewings of the site. They didn't result in the same number of expressions of interests, and most of the feedback was the level of investment required, taking it from where it is now to where it should be in terms of a proper business case, and that's something that we've heard previously, but at the time when we went out to the market we didn't have this level of funding to be able to offer. So we are hopeful in this revised process that we've got this funding that kind of unlocks the heritage deficit, that we will be in a better position.
I just want to say thank you for all your hard work on the Winter Gardens. It's not been an easy project, so thank you.
Councillor Curran.
Thanks. I'm sure, Louise, you and your team are really pleased about the extra funding. It's really welcome. I know we were all a bit worried with the extra costs sort of mounting up with the projects. The 4 million towards the Winter Gardens is really popular locally. Residents are really happy about that. And what I would say, the 500,000 that's now going towards the skate park and the pavilion, this is also really welcome, and I think that's right. The guys behind the skate park really happy with that extra money. But I think the way the money's been broken up is right. I think the pavilion, certainly with the extra costs involved, needed that extra boost. So you know, onwards and upwards. Thank you.
Councillor Bright.
Thank you. Yeah, my question relates to the skate park and the council's equality duty. Research shows that skate parks are used by far fewer girls than boys. Despite an uptick in female skateboarders since 2020, it's estimated only 15% of skateboarders are female. This is according to data shared by Skateboard GB. Since councils have a duty to eliminate discrimination and advance equality of opportunity, what measures will be taken to ensure this skate park is more inclusive and the facilities serve our residents more equitably? Is it possible to ensure there's an inclusive consultation about the design of this park, particularly amongst teenagers to ensure this skate park appeals to a wider group of users and promotes more female participation. Please can we make sure this skate park is designed with maximum inclusivity in mind, with the ambition that all members of our community will feel comfortable there. I was very pleased to note that a request was made at the Partnership Board meeting to ensure the skate park will be a safe environment with a review to design out antisocial behaviour. Are you able to give me more detail about this and any reassurance that this review will specifically consider the safety of women and girls, for example, with regard to lighting, layout, CCTV and access to toilets? Thank you.
Thanks. So the proposal for the next stages around delivery of the skate park will be through a design and build contract that will then have a break clause around planning. So if it didn't receive planning, we wouldn't go through to construction, and that's quite normal. As part of that design stage, we will be putting in those requirements around the way in which the site is designed, thinking about the antisocial behaviour, thinking about the people that will be using the skate park, and as part of that there will be an engagement process. Now I know that the team behind the proposal for the skate park have set up a separate CIC which is covering the whole of the district and working with different organisations to support some groups that are underrepresented in skateboarding to be more included in skateboarding activity. This will be an open site, so anybody can access it at any time. The proposal is that the way it is run, that there'll be events and activities that can be run from the site that are kind of free access, and our officer that's running the revenue programme, where we're testing different activities that support coastal wellbeing, will be working with those organisations to look at other kind of funding opportunities. So we are engaging with Skateboard England and Sport England around what the kind of community can come together in terms of putting projects and proposals forward. And I know that they are engaging in the network locally, and Every Girl Matters, I think. And so they are engaging as part of that to think about how they further promote skateboarding to a wider audience. But we will pick it up in the design process. Thank you.
Councillor Green.
Yeah, I'm pleased that in general the sustainability of these projects across the board does seem to be, on your agenda, because I think that's important that they don't become burdens on the council going forward. But as you know, the Regeneration Board was concerned about the sustainability of the skateboard project. So have you taken that on board?
Yeah, thank you. So in the designing of most of the town deal and levelling up schemes across the whole district, we considered projects that had a commercial or financial element that would support sustainability. And we have looked at those on a kind of case-by-case basis. So the refurbishment of the lift down at Walpole Bay will link up with the pavilion so that we know there is an organisation there to provide the maintenance and kind of operational running of the lift. So in each of those cases we are doing that. The reason why the proposal includes a kiosk for the skate park is so that there is an element of finance that's gained from the facility that will then be ploughed back into it. So we've been working across departments, including property and coastal and public realm, to make sure that the three teams come together, and we have shared all of our experience and financial information. So the potential for the concession in the kiosk, what income that could provide us, and then the costs that open spaces will have in terms of the ROSPA costs, maintenance and management. We're also in touch with other similar skate parks that have either been set up by local authorities and or are leased to community organisations to make sure that we have that information together. So as we put that final part of the plan together, we know that it should be sustainable moving forward.
Councillor Davis.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Just popping back onto the Winter Gardens a minute. You mentioned that obviously match funding is part of the requirement. What percentage match is required? Because that'll obviously very much define who might come forward, because they would need to have access to that to even be considered. Are we looking at 10, 20% or 50-50 or what? Sorry.
Thanks. Yeah, so Dreamlands were matching the town deal bid pound for pound, so it was a 4 million match. We intend to go out on the same basis because part of the town deal was about bringing in other funding and leveraging in private investment. We'll see that across the portfolio of projects across Margate and Ramsgate. Some of it might come as a later stage after the government have finished monitoring us. But in the first instance, we will go out and identify that it's a 4 million match. It isn't something that is part of our memorandum with central government, so we know that there's an opportunity to check and challenge that depending on what projects or what proposals come forward. Yeah. But we also know that that kind of level of investment is needed.
Thanks, Louise.
Councillor Manners.
Thank you. Can I, coming back to what Councillor Packman had said, the £4 million, is that, you say that will actually be ring fenced and we won't be chipping away at it with ongoing consultants' fees, and as we look for a potential operator, is that's correct, is it?
Yes.
Great. Okay. I mean, everyone hopes that an operator can be found and the match funding is there and so on to resurrect the Winter Gardens. If in a year's time we're here and we still don't have an operator, and obviously I hope that we do find one, do we have plan B for that money in terms of other venues for a performing arts centre? Because I don't know, I've never built a performing arts centre, but I imagine £4 million on an otherwise empty site would go an awful long way to creating something that's purpose-built rather than adapting an Edwardian building, with all the problems and issues that come with it, and also its location and parking and other issues that make it perhaps more difficult to find an operator for that specific building. So is there a potential other use for that 4 million if we don't find an operator? And is anything happening with that regard in parallel to this, just so that we have a plan B ready to go? Yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Thanks. So we won't be sat here in a year's time saying that we haven't found an operator. We've got a process to go through. We've committed to come back to Cabinet with updates on that. And I suspect within probably 2 to 3 months, we'll be in a position of knowing whether there are operators out there who are interested and working through that process. We are looking at Plan B if there doesn't happen to be an operator. Most of that is focused on the Winter Gardens and thinking about other opportunities within that. We don't really have any big vacant sites in Margate that could deliver a new cultural centre from nothing. So I think our focus will be, as the intervention says, diversifying our heritage assets. It will be on our heritage assets. One of the outputs to central government is the refurbishment and repurpose of a heritage and cultural asset. So that will be the focus. That will be where our kind of plan B lies. And any of those decisions, as has been previously approved by Cabinet will go back to Cabinet for changes in project scope.
Thank you. That clarifies an awful lot. Just one more point, though, with the winter gardens. So if, let's say in the next 3 to 4 months, that we don't have an operator that's going to run something that we would recognise as the winter gardens that we had when we all went to see Jim Davidson a few years ago, albeit an updated version of that. I saw you there, Becky. If we haven't found a theatre type operator with the ancillaries that go with that type, what we'd recognise as the winter gardens, we all imagine it to be. Am I right in therefore understanding that we would be looking at alternative other leisure uses for it, perhaps sports uses or something along those lines? Has any thought been given to what that plan B might be for the structure?
So we're not necessarily going out looking for an organisation to come forward and deliver exactly what the winter gardens look like before, and on record, I didn't go and see Jim Davidson. We are looking for an operator that will bring leisure uses into that building. There are obviously specific requirements. It's a Grade 2 star listed building, and so there are requirements in relation to what can be delivered and refurbished within that, and that is what we are working on at the moment. We are putting everything into that to go out to the market, working with the marketing team, before we think about what other opportunities there might be for the building. So yeah, I mean, that's where we are now. And as I said, any further approvals will come back through the Cabinet process because it will be a change in scope.
Councillor Wing.
I just wanted to say that I am so grateful for these sessions, particularly the levelling up sessions, because I've found them really useful, because not only it gives me a better understanding of what's going on in my own area, but it's given me a better understanding of what's going on across the whole of Thanet. And it's been really useful to have Andrea here to begin that conversation around assets, which have always been problematic for us and for residents. And I know the last thing you want to do at the end of a hard day is actually come here and be bombarded with questions. So, and the other thing, the sense I get is that if you don't look at the individual projects, but you look at the scope of the projects across Thanet, then there's a real sense of, I really feel that we're moving forward and these are going to be realised. But also, there's a huge mix and diversity of what's on offer. So there is almost something for every resident. So I just wanted to say thank you for spending the time for coming here and allowing us to bombard you with questions. But I also think there's a real opportunity to take some of the, because we mustn't forget that we've got the villages and Broadstairs that have no funding. So the Newington Centre and the skate park, some of these successful things, we need to replicate those in areas of Broadstairs and the villages where we know there is also deprivation, sometimes on a similar level to what we see in my ward and in Newington and in parts of Margate. So I just want to say thank you for having a long day, basically.
Okay, any further questions? No, just a couple of quick ones from me. What discussions have we having with Dreamland on Live Nation about the next steps for Dreamland? Not just for Dreamland, maybe as well the gap in the seafront where the hotel should have been built.
Thank you. So part of the team that were under, that are the existing Dreamland team, have moved across, so our relationship with them continues. We've had initial discussions with them about their plans, and they are putting together kind of a master plan for the site, which was always what they wanted to do, with a focus on where investment should go for which elements of the business, and I know that they're going to be working on that. The Gap site that's next to, that you refer to, isn't part of the Live Nation site. That remains separate, and as my understanding is that it potentially will go back out again to identify hotel operators to come forward and deliver a scheme on that site, and that might need a bit of reworking in terms of design, but it isn't part of the Live Nation site.
Sure. So do we know if they're still going to offer a theme park offering there, or is it just going to become a music venue? Because I know in the local plan it's protected as a theme park.
I can't speak for the team down there at Dreamland, but my understanding is they are going to continue the offer that they have. The music element is a key driver for people to visit the area. They've been working with the likes of Southeastern to have later trains in order to support people coming to the venue. So I think they are still continuing to have a mixed offer on the site. It's what provides more interest over other music venues. So what we're hoping is that at some point, as they work through their kind of master planning for the site, that they could come and do a councillor's briefing on that, and it's something that we could suggest to them for a future date. Obviously, they're brand new in terms of working for Live Nation, and they've got other resources that they didn't have before across a larger organisation. So yeah, I know that they're working really hard on that.
Okay, thanks. The skate park, so you just confirm that would be free to use for every resident, no charge at any point? No? Okay. And do you know if there's a developer been identified yet? Are they ready to go? Or?
So the skate park will be part of the public realm. There might be events and activities on the site that is paid for, that's managed, and that will help pay for the kind of management of that. We've been working with the project proposers, who are a community organisation, around how the site is managed and run into the future. So it's not a developer as such, or do you mean the contractor? And if you mean the contractor, we have a PIN notice out at the moment with questions around the kind of procurement documents and the specifics around the tender that we might want to pick up. So that's live. I think that closes towards the end of this month. And then we will use that information to develop the tender pack to go out to the marketplace. It's not a huge marketplace. There are obviously consultants that do skate parks as part of bigger kind of public realm and or leisure uses, but there are 3 or 4 very specific skate park contractors, so we are hoping to get a response from them as well, and what they deliver is basically skate parks across the world.
Sure. And just one last one. So have we had any surveyor costing Dreamland, the Winter Garden, sorry, to know that 8 million will bring that up to standard? I mean, I've walked past there a number of times, even like down to like railings and glass and windows and things like that, and you think this can take some money here to get this right.
So I can't remember the previous cabinet paper, the date of it, but we've provided quite a lot of information in the data pack that the marketing agents have. So we commissioned an update in survey of the building, a costed survey of the building. So I think that provided something like 6 million requirement in the first couple of years, and that would refurbish everything, but it wouldn't necessarily deliver what an operator, depending on what that operator is, needs within that building. So then there would be other costs on top of that. So any operator couldn't solely rely on that because it's our information, but at least it provides some ballpark information for operators when considering their business plan and proposal that they would put forward.
Thank you, Louise. So there's no further questions, and I'm sure there's no recommendations on this to take forward to Cabinet. We all note the report, please. Okay, moving on to... Thank you, Louise, for that. Moving on to item number 10, the forward plan and exempt Cabinet decision list. Is there any questions to be asked on that? And we all note the report then, please. Okay. Moving on to the last agenda item. Item number 11, the review of the overview and scrutiny work programme for 23-24. So have we all had a chance to have a look at it? I presume we have. Councillor Patman.
Yeah, Chair, well, thank you. You already mentioned it previously with Louise about Dreamland. Now, I'm not saying that we need to take this on as a work programme under overview of scrutiny, but I wondered if this was a good time to say, could we call Dreamland in? Because of some concerns I may have and some concerns that the public have around the behaviour, and I know it's changed into new hands, into Live Nation, around the impact on our businesses on the seafront that Dreamland have when they bring 15,000 people to the streets, but the impact on our street cleansing team, the safety of our residents. You know, there was a number of incidents last year where paramedics had to be called for spiking situations and whatnot, and social behaviour and low-level crime. I'm quite concerned about the security and the qualifications that the security members hold. You know, some of them have just applied for a badge and gone on a 2-day training course, and that's them as security officers. And then obviously the licensing hours, we're going to see 4 a.m. finishes. So I just wondered if this was a good opportunity to invite Dreamland in, to kind of, for us as overview of scrutiny, to maybe ask some questions to them, or maybe we go and visit them and have an on-site kind of tour. I just didn't know whether this was the right forum to bring it up, or we do it elsewhere.
I totally agree. I think hopefully that Live Nation are a much more professional outfit and those sort of problems can be rectified. But I think we'll take Louise up on the offer of getting Dreamland in for a briefing, I think, and then we can take it from there. I think that's probably the way forward before we go down the scrutiny review element. But yeah, I think
Chair, can I just suggest that might be something that you might want to invite them in for a members' briefing. It's not, the council's not responsible for Dreamland, so to that extent, it's not appropriate. Wouldn't be something for overview and scrutiny.
Yeah, so like I say, I think we get Louise to invite Live Nation in for a briefing at some point in the next several weeks. Okay, so if we all look at that work programme, we've now come to the end of the impact of tourism review, nearly. Hopefully on April the 18th we can present that to the panel and then on to Cabinet. But we have a new subject that we want to put a panel together for, which is looking at grant funding, and I don't want to upset Louise or any concern there, but this is just really to look at more low-level grant funding, that maybe there are things for sports facilities or event planning and things like that, that maybe just a few more pairs of eyes looking out to maybe find things that we're missing out on. And I think we want to put a panel together. So have we got any volunteers, 4 or 5 people that would like to be on that? I know Councillor Austin would love to be on that, and I'm going to make Councillor Austin the chair for that. So if you want to be on it, get in touch with Councillor Austin, and we'll discuss that at the next meeting. And also we need a Cabinet presentation for the 18th of Councillor Bright.
Yeah, I've just got a question about going forward. Again, I don't know whether it's necessarily, well, it's not within our purview, but I think it's a really, really major problem we've got in Thanet is we don't talk about it enough, is dangerous roads. So we talk about parking quite a lot because obviously parking is within our remit, but Thanet has the highest number of serious collisions and serious casualties involving children compared to any other district in Kent. Thanet is the second most dangerous place for pedestrians in Kent. I think that's behind Bexley or Bromley or somewhere in London. And Thanet is the most dangerous place to cycle in Kent. Now, whilst it doesn't have there's not, it's not within our purview, it is within our area to worry about. It's our residents who are getting killed and injured on the roads. I was wondering if there's something that we could do around that area in terms of looking at how we might work more effectively with KCC to slow people down, basically.
Yeah, and I know the KCC Council for Margate has been very successful in bringing in a 20-mile-an-hour zone.
Well, this is something that I think we can
so
replicate elsewhere, right?
Yeah, sure. I mean, there's obviously a problem being identified. Sorry, Councillor Austin, do you want to come in?
Sorry, Chair, I was just going to say that actually that various of us are in lengthy and extensive correspondence with KCC about this, and on what works in Margate, apparently we are told will not work in various of our other areas. We still haven't found justifications as to why. But it is a much trickier one than it at first appears, I think, should we say. So I'm thoroughly supportive of Councillor Bright's suggestion that working out ways to work more effectively with KCC to improve road safety would be a jolly good thing for us to work on. But it's a much trickier one than one might at first assume.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I'd suggest inviting a KCC officer along, but I know there's been issues with the joint transportation of getting officers, so I'm not sure if that will, but I'll look into that and see what we can do. Councillor Wing?
Having walked my entire ward and undertaken a highway improvement plan that needs updating, it was very enlightening and educational that one of the key, because as soon as you've got a clipboard and you walk in the streets, residents come and talk to you, but one of the key issues in Central Harbour, and I think it's exactly the same on the Central Strip, is pedestrian safety. We've got one Pelican controlled crossing in Central Harbour, but we've got some of the most serious roads. Yeah. If you take the one going in Montefiore, Eastcliff out the other way, where there's been a number of incidents, there needs to be a bit more of a coordinated approach, because I know we've discussed it long and hard at Town Council, but I think there needs to be a bit more of a coordinated approach across the Isle of Thanet, because I think there are similarities between the coastal strips and the bits behind the coastal strips, and I also think that the parking strategy is key to some of this. So I found a significant number of pavements where pedestrians can't even access them because cars are parked on them. So I think there's a number of things that have the chance to impact positively or negatively on how we move forward, but there's also a situation where we need to talk with KCC and our town councillors to make some of this forward movement, but we do have some of the most dangerous roads and pavements in Kent, and it's shocking.
I absolutely agree. I mean, I've got a junction in my ward that's been identified as one of the most dangerous junctions in Thanet, Brunswick Road and Park Lane, which everyone should know about. And trying to get changes to that has just been, an absolute ridiculous. You just can't make any headways with KCC at all. But I will try and see if we can get a KCC highways officer to come and do a presentation to us at some point. Councillor Green.
Part of the problem is the demise of the JTB. I mean, KCC officers and KCC councillors, for that matter, are just not exposed to ward councillors, so they don't, or they can avoid the problems. So I think part of the focus, if we do have a study, needs to be on that.
Yeah, I mean, I was part of the JTB last term, and it was useless because the council officers wouldn't come and present their report, so they won't come out of ours. Councillor Davis.
I am just pleased to confirm that as a member of the JTB, we have a meeting booked for the 21st of March, which I'm sure will proceed, unlike some others. So, agenda's just come out tonight, so thank you, Stephen.
Okay, so moving on. So we need to book in a cabinet presentation for the next meeting. Does anybody have any ideas for a cabinet presentation? If that's a no, Councillor Manners.
I'd be interested from open spaces to find out what more we can be doing with our green and recreation spaces in Thanet.
So what would the presentation exactly do you want them subject to be on?
I suspect that our green colleagues would have something to say about how they'd like some of our green spaces managed. I'd like to see, we've got a changing demographic. I'd like to know more about what we're doing for older residents, what we're doing for biodiversity, what we're doing in my own ward at North Down Park with the dilapidated, disused pavilion to get that back into service, which I know is now going to be marketed to do so. But I'd like to hear more about what budgets are, what the well, basically to know what more can be done and what the priorities might be going forward.
Okay, Councillor Davis.
Yeah, I think tying in with that, the more we could have a discussion. Maybe Tony Marmo would be the person because
cabinet presentation.
Oh, a cabinet presentation. Okay, I don't know who. Steve Goldman. All right. Because there are, still ongoing, how shall we say, bits that could be managed much better, like interaction with community groups and so on, so that there's a standard that was worked to, particularly with some of the registered gardens, because despite the fact that's the equivalent of a listing, we do have community groups that are just shoving anything they like in there and not sticking to planting plans that were prepared a few years ago. And I think it would be good to have a discussion about those and sustainability of how these gardens can be maintained going forward, because at the moment there's no standard established.
Okay, Councillor Bright.
I would like to invite Councillor Keane along to talk about how we provide for young people in Thanet, how we engage with young people. I know we have the Thanet Youth Council. I have tried a few times to propose a couple of things that we could do to juice that up a little bit, and I would like to hear more about what they are doing. Councillor Brighton and I have had really big success in Broadstairs with engagement with schools, and in fact we're looking at potentially doing our first Broadstairs forum with all the different school councils in one place coming up. I would love to see something similar happen at Thanet, but it's falling on deaf ears at the moment, and I think we can do so much more for young people in Thanet.
Yeah, I think the Youth Council was mentioned once before. So, Councillor Green.
I'd like to support that very much. With KCC virtually withdrawing all support for youth services, I think that would be very timely.
Councillor Wing.
I mean, I support both of them. Of teaching young people and then mentoring young people. I can't remember when there's been a specific spend on young people in my last 5 years as a councillor. The skate park with the kiosk, which I think is vital, and hopefully that's got a safe space for young people, is the only thing that I think's been specific funding that I could say is directly for young people. The facilities we have for young people are truly shocking, and we need to look at the only way we're going to avoid some of the antisocial behaviour is to invest in our young people, and then it reduces the costs of other stuff. I also want to support the open spaces, and I think specifically, if I'm a town councillor and a district councillor, and obviously the statutory responsibilities of TDC far outweigh the statutory responsibilities of our town councils, and I believe there is much more mileage for a district and town to work together, and that for the town to use some of that luxury money they have that isn't attached to a statutory responsibility, which I believe is allotments, to be used in supporting TDC in improving the public realm. I think I'm in month number 6 or 7 of trying to get some graffiti removed from the main road into Ramsgate, and my idea was, let's coordinate this with KCC, TDC and RTC. I think it's finally happening, but the amount of officer time that's been wasted over the argument of who's going to pay for the road closure is unbelievable. But I also think open spaces need to be formally trying to work with the many volunteer groups that actually look after our open spaces. So in Ramsgate, all our key parks are looked after by volunteers. The shelters are looked after by volunteers. So that we know resources are short, and what we've got to do is join forces, town, district and volunteers, to maximise outputs. And so I'd welcome open spaces, but I'd also want to be looking at the removal of graffiti, and thank God we're removing weeds without glyphosate now.
Okay, so there's 2 proposals there. So Councillor Keane, who would like to hear from Councillor Keane about the Youth Council? Okay, so it's everybody apart from you two. Youth provision. Okay, well, I'll invite Councillor Keane on the 18th of April and see if she's available for that. And then we're penciling Councillor Alban and for the 28th of May for something around open spaces, etc. Okay, everybody happy with that? Okay. That concludes the business for tonight's meeting. I declare this meeting closed. I'd like to thank all council officers, members and cabinet members for coming along and giving your time this evening. Thank you very much.